The story begins with a boy no more than 7 years old being hit in the face, causing him to fall to the ground. The boy knelt down and carefully touched the place where he had been hit, asking his stepmother for forgiveness. The girl in front of him called him an idiot and asked if he thought something like this could be resolved with a simple apology. She continued to talk about how she didn't need a child breaking priceless vases, and the boy again explained that it was an accident and he was truly sorry. The child's stepmother grabbed him by the hair and said that she did not want to hear his ridiculous excuses anymore. The girl ordered him to just shut up and get out of there, and she wasn't even moved by his pleas for help. She literally threw the child out and ordered him never to return to her house again, so the very young protagonist was expelled from his own home because of his stepmother, who did not like him. At this point, the unknown girl slammed the book shut, saying that she couldn't read it anymore. And I have reread this part so many times and still can't stand it because of the actions of the main character of the novel named Leila Marshall. She was originally born as a commoner and was loved by everyone for her gentle nature, but due to her beautiful appearance, she was forced to become the concubine of a village lord. However, just a few days before the wedding, someone from this world took possession of her body. The woman who took possession of Leila's body immediately fled the village so that her acquaintances would not ask unnecessary questions. In her new surroundings, she portrayed an angelic image, thanks to which the adopted son of a rich, divorced marquis, the Viscount Marshall, became infatuated with her. He proposes to her, after which the girl begins to succeed in marriage and leads a luxurious life. However, for some reason, Viscount Marshall suddenly dies of illness after their wedding. And as Lady Marshall, having become the mistress of the mansion, Leila cruelly treats her son Hugo, who is the offspring of a viscount, and eventually throws him out of the house. The reader felt very sorry for the boy, and she thought that if she had been in Leila's place, she would have treated him much better. She could not understand how anyone could treat a child so cruelly, and decided that this female character really deserved to die. At that moment, the microwave beeped, and the girl remembered that she had just baked cookies, noting that today they turned out well and seemed even better than usual. While she was thinking that all that was left was to cover them with melted chocolate and everything would be ready, someone started knocking on her door. The man behind the door demanded that the door be opened, and the brunette sighed in disappointment as she had hoped that at least today everything would be fine. The heroine was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her father. She has traveled from house to house several times to avoid meeting him when he comes home drunk, but he finds her every time. The girl couldn't understand how he would ever know where she was and decided to just ignore him and go about her business. In an instant, the oven exploded, and in the epicenter of the fire, the girl wondered if her life had been more like a romance than a real romance. The pain of her whole body burning and the dizziness of thick black smoke filling her lungs were the very last moments of her life, which were painful and miserable. The next thing the main character realized when she opened her eyes was that she woke up not in her apartment. She immediately assumed that it was heaven, but quickly dismissed the thought as she didn't think she could get there. At this point, the maid turned to the blonde and informed Mrs. Marshall that a small problem had arisen. The girl immediately convulsively rose from her comfortable bed because she could not believe that the woman in front of her called her Mrs. Marshall. She jumped up from her seat to go to the mirror, and saw in front of her dazzling golden hair and amethyst-colored eyes, with a pure, pretty face. The heroine could not believe that she had taken the place of Leila Marshall in the novel that she had only recently reread. Then she remembered that there was a reason for this. Because before the explosion, she had been thinking that if she had been in Leila's place, she would have treated the boy differently. At this moment, the maid who had been silently watching her actions could not stand it any longer and asked if everything was all right with Madame. The girl understood that she needed to calm down so that she would not be taken for crazy, and asked the servants what had happened. At first the maid hesitated, but then carefully reported that young Master Hugo had fallen unconscious. The heroine was immediately overcome with panic, but she managed to calm down by reminding herself that she was now the Viscountess Marshall. When she asked again, the maid confirmed her words and asked if she needed to deal with it as before. Seeing that the main character did not understand anything, the maid explained that she could lock the door and forbid the young master to leave the room until he recovered. The blonde's face distorted with horror at this revelation, and she said that she was going to Hugo's room. The maid wanted to stop her, but the Viscountess turned to her threateningly, asking if something was wrong or if she, as the mistress, could not go to his room. Having frightened the maid, the girl ordered her to bring them to the air marshal's room. Although Leila was determined to visit the main character, she still felt uncomfortable entering his room because she was afraid of what she would see there. So she only opened the door slightly. But still, having overcome herself, the girl approached Hugo and called out to the boy, who was curled up in a ball on the bed, and then turned to face her. Leila started talking about how she heard that he was not feeling well, and so she asked if his body hurt a lot. The young man began to tremble with fear and ask his mother for forgiveness for causing her trouble. It was at that moment that she saw the true consequences of the terrible violence she had only read about before. In the original, Hugo, who grew up in this hell in the distant future, returns as emperor, and upon arriving, the marshal immediately executes the Viscountess in order to overcome the past and achieve ideal revenge. While reading the novel, the main character enjoyed the part where he takes his revenge, because unlike Hugo, she was never able to escape from her father, who constantly abused her. And while she enjoyed the story, now she had a real opportunity to help Hugo. After thinking about it for a bit, the blonde turned to the maid and asked why the young master was so skinny. And when the brunette replied that he hadn't eaten for several days, the current Leila looked at her coldly, noting to herself that this was a ridiculous excuse. She waved her hand and ordered that some soup be brought immediately for the emaciated boy, while Hugo silently looked at her. When the maid left, the main character turned back to the boy and came close to him. Hugo thought he was about to be hit again, but the girl simply touched his shoulder gently. She thought that this child was in a terrible state, and that he was as hot as a fire in a fireplace. The girl extended her hand, thinking that nothing bad would happen if she came closer, but the boy's reaction to her actions was too strong. He began to beg for mercy, constantly repeating that he was wrong, and the girl was horrified. The boy said that he was not in any pain at all and promised not to cause his mother any more problems, and the girl approached him again, trying to speak as gently as possible. She assured him that she had come there because she had heard that he was ill and did not need to apologize. Hugo did not understand her intention and continued to talk about how he got on his mother's nerves because he got sick whenever he felt like it, but now he promised not to get sick anymore. Listening, his girlfriend wondered how long he had to suffer until he turned into a child who constantly apologizes even when he is not at fault. Leila approached him and told him that from now on, he no longer had to apologize because there was nothing wrong with him being sick, explaining that this was not something people should apologize for. She thought he needed a wet towel to cool down a bit and began to look around the room. While the girl was looking for a towel, she noticed that his room was too dirty, and at this rate, the boy would pick up something else. As she poured water into the bowl, she decided that when she finished, she would immediately have to order him to be transferred to another room. The girl noticed that there wasn't that much water and asked if Hugo had accidentally drunk it, and he again apologized and nodded, explaining that he was very thirsty. While she was thinking, the maid whom the heroine had sent for soup entered the room. The blonde extended her hand to her and announced that she would feed the young gentleman herself. The maid began to panic and say that she could do it herself, but the heroine had already grabbed the tray. Seeing that the maid brought scraps, the girl remembered that in the original, the maid was no better than Leila, and together with her tormented poor Hugo. And while Leila simply ignored Hugo, the maid openly humiliated and insulted him. Unable to bear it any longer, the girl threw the plate at the maid, saying that she asked her to bring normal food, not stinking leftovers. After the boy was brought new soup, the blonde ordered that fresh water, wet towels, and cold medicine for the children be brought, and the maid began to carry out her orders. Some time passed, and the brunette returned and said that there were no medicines in the mansion, and the blonde replied that if they were not in the mansion, then they had to go and get them. When the maid hesitated, the blonde smiled and asked if she dared to ignore her words, and the other side, frightened, replied that she would do everything right away. The main character no longer paid attention to her and scooped up a spoonful of soup, asking the boy to open his mouth. At first, the child hesitated but decided to obey and let the girl feed him. The main character praised him and then thoughtfully stared at his face while he ate. It saddened her to know that thorny vines had already begun to grow in Hugo's life. Leila and the other people in this mansion are already like thorns to Hugo, and as he grows, the painful memories will eat away at him like thorns. There was only one person who could fix Hugo's messed up life, who became the godfather in the original, and that was Duke Lucius Jupert. which will allow the main character to stay close to him and help him forget Leila's cold embrace, which, in the heroine's opinion, only gave him pain. Finally, the maid came and said that she had found only the adult pills and had divided them in half. This was acceptable, so the heroine accepted them, noticing that the water had run out, which is why she again had to ask the maid to bring some so that Hugo could wash down the medicine. The servant's face said that this should be reported immediately, but she silently stared at the floor. The heroine thought that the girl was completely unable to hide her facial expression in front of her master, although even stupidity has its limits. And the maid was indeed stupid, since she did not notice the changes in her master at all. She thought that this must be a new game of her mistress, and that she would first show the young master the illusion that everything would be fine now, and that he could relax, and then she would crush all his hopes in the bud. But the lady kept giving her various orders, such as to wet the towels with water and move them here, or there was too much water, so she had to wring out the towels and drain some. And after that, the blonde reminded the maid that she had not cleaned up the broken plate. And when the maid made it clear that she would do everything, Leila got tired of teasing and said that as soon as she finished, she needed to get out of the mansion. After her statement, the maid began to ask what she was talking about, because she had been faithful to her mistress all this time. The girl asked if this meant that she did not want to leave, and the maid replied that it was unfair to leave so suddenly. The main character smiled and admitted that the maid was right, and she had acted unwisely. So she handed the maid the earrings, which she treasured very much. The brunette gasped as she seemed to understand what her mistress wanted to achieve. Namely, she had arranged all this to give the maid a surprise. At that moment, the blonde threateningly asked what the girl chose, or she would be thrown out as a servant who stole her master's things. And thus she will live on the run for the rest of her life. At that moment, Leila smiled and gave the choice to leave herself. After this, the maid was horrified and ran out of the room, leaving the two people alone. The main character turned to the boy and apologized for scaring him with all that noise, gently ruffling his hair. The girl put her hand on his shoulder and suggested that he go to her room, as it was too dirty. She picked him up in her arms and promised that from that moment on, she would protect him so that he would be happy all his life. Leila carried the boy to her room and, closing the door behind her, wished him good night. When she leaned against the door, the girl admitted that although she was very tired, she had to sort everything out. One of the maids of the Marshal's family, named Jane, saw her and asked Madame if something had happened in the room since Madame did not go inside. The blonde smiled and replied that she wanted to ask for something. She told him that her personal maid had recently left the mansion. She went on to say that she had heard rumors that she had stolen some of her jewelry, and Jane nodded, indicating that she understood. And since we were talking about the mistress's personal maid, she promised to spread the information throughout the mansion. The girl could not forgive the man who mocked her favorite character. The heroine also ordered that Hugo be given the best room in the mansion and said that from now on, if anyone were to bully or neglect Hugo, she would not simply stand by and watch. She asked to make sure that everyone who worked in the mansion knew this, and the maid made it clear that everything would be done. The girl also asked to prepare a crew, as she was going to the territory of the Rupert family to the mansion of Duke Lucius. The next morning, the carriage, as promised, was ready, and the girl left the mansion. Jane, one of the maids of the mansion, asked what kind of luggage the heroine was holding in her hands. The Viscountess smiled and explained that it was, so to speak, bait for the beast she was going to catch. As she set off, the maid watched the carriage go by, wondering if everything would be all right with her mistress, who had set off without an invitation. Cold-blooded, a contractor of the devil, a man who ignores any woman, be it a commoner or a princess herself. These are all words that are inherent to Duke Rupert. He was known for his notoriety, although he never showed himself in public. But despite all the horrible rumors, he was incredibly handsome, and the original mentioned more than one compliment about his appearance. While the girl was riding in the carriage, she thought that he had no reason to meet her. But she also understood that he had to become Hugo's godfather, and for that she had to meet him at least once. When the coachman announced that they had arrived, the girl disembarked and looked at the mansion, which turned out to be really big. At that moment, the man behind her asked the purpose of her visit, and the girl turned around at the sound of his voice. She smiled and replied that she was here to see His Excellency Duke Rupert. The young man turned out to be one of the knights of the duchy, and he asked suspiciously if she had made an appointment. The girl smiled and asked to tell Lucius that Leila had arrived to see him. She behaved so confidently and freely that the knight believed her and said that he would immediately report this to the Duke, asking him to wait a minute. He blushed a little, thinking that an angel like her simply couldn't lie. As he moved further and further away from the girl, she couldn't help but think that she would have to wait a little more than a minute. She turned out to be right, and the waiting time dragged on, and it even started to rain, from which the girl could not hide. The heroine already wanted to turn around and go back, but at that moment, the knight with whom she had spoken approached her again and asked her to go with him. As she obediently followed him, Leila thought that the atmosphere was somehow too relaxed. After a while, the knight stopped and announced that he had brought a lady, and the heroine realized that this was not a drawing room. As she walked in, the girl wondered who in their right mind would bring a woman they had never seen before into their personal office. So when the young man greeted her, she felt as if she was in a lion's den. She felt uncomfortable being at such a short distance with a man she didn't know. And when she looked at his face, she was amazed to admit that he looked less like a lion and more like a cute cat. Now she understood why the princess was so attracted to him, because he was a man who shined like the sun. At that moment, the young man touched her hair and noticed that she was soaking wet, suggesting that she take off her coat. He went on to say that she had come to his estate very calmly, calling him by name and saying that they had an appointment, so he asked if they were friends or lovers. The girl realized that he was speaking sarcastically and lowered her head, asking for forgiveness, explaining that she thought that he would not agree to meet her if she did not do something like that. At that moment, she looked at him again and asked why he let her in, knowing that she was lying. The man smiled and admitted that, to tell the truth, women had chased after him before. But he had never seen anyone who was brave enough to pull off this trick, and he became curious. He complimented her by saying that she had a pretty face, and remarked that if she decided to come in person and see for herself, he would not want to spoil such a pretty face. The young man remarked that it would be great if he could get a proper answer, and the girl thought that although he smiled sweetly, his eyes betrayed Duke Jupert in him. The girl replied that she had a proposition for him, and asked if they could sit down, to which she received a positive answer, after which the Duke began to pour tea. In the original, Lucius had no interest in women and hated anyone who tagged along with him, so if Leila couldn't convince him, he was in trouble. When the young man asked what she wanted to say, the girl thought how good it was that she was familiar with the plot, and could therefore interest him by knowing that he had a spy in his mansion. Currently, Lucius is suffering from the loss of the precious mine, and the girl said that she heard that the precious mine was given to the Hillen family, and because of the spy, the Jupert family suffered a lot of losses. The young man put the cup on the table and suggested that she had not only guessed everything down to the smallest detail, but it seemed that this rat was also selling information. The girl smiled and did not answer his question, saying that it did not matter now. The main character said that she could catch this rat, and also return to him the mine given to Dawson by Hillen. The young man pretended not to be shocked by her words and thoughtfully rubbed his chin. When he asked how she was going to do this, the girl, as if expecting this, opened her luggage, which had been next to her all this time. After which she laid several documents on the table, saying that these were her plans for the future. The main character gave his lordship the opportunity to read them and draw his own conclusions. Judging by the plot, the heroine realized that she could figure out the spy and the people with whom he communicated and all the information transmitted. It turned out that it wasn't that difficult to exploit the Hillen family's weaknesses and get the mine back. Reading the story over and over again was the only happiness the main character had, and she was constantly thinking about how to make Hugo happier. When the young man had read all these documents, he looked at the girl with a serious expression on his face and asked if all this information was reliable and where she got it from. The girl lowered her head and replied that she couldn't tell him, but she could guarantee that she could be trusted, so he had nothing to lose anyway. The man asked why she wanted to help him and suggested that she must want something in return. The girl nodded, making it clear that she really wanted to get something from him in return, namely the signing of the contract. The Duke became wary and asked what kind of contract they were talking about, to which the girl smiled and replied that she wanted to enter into a marriage contract with him. The man was surprised and asked for details, as he did not expect this at all. The heroine explained that she wanted to sign a marriage contract with him and that 1 year would be enough. Hugo was thrown out into the street by his stepmother and was found there by Lucius, who was just passing by. The girl would never have kicked him out, but she could not live with him, always forgetting that she had ended up in the body of a man who constantly abused him. Her presence only makes things worse for him, and he needs to arrange a meeting for them so that the baby can become an heir just like in history. The girl continued to say that the Duke would understand everything when he read it, but in order to get the mine back, he would need the help of the Marshall family. It is much easier to get a pass after marriage than to buy one, and they can get divorced as soon as everything is decided. The heroine promised to leave within a year, asking the Duke to simply act as if they were truly a married couple and to be a good husband. She noticed that he wasn't interested in women anyway, so he definitely wouldn't fall in love with her. The heroine also made it clear that the same applies to her, who will not bother him in any way. The man grinned incredulously and asked if she really had no feelings for him. The main character smiled and assured the man that if he became interested in another woman, he could safely date her, since she was only interested in the contract. The young man laughed hollowly and admitted that it was an intriguing proposal, but he did not understand why she needed a contract for only a year's marriage. The Duke clarified again that marriage was indeed the only thing she wanted in return for this deal. In fact, the girl wanted Lucius to adopt Hugo, but if she said so, it would be even more suspicious. So the girl replied that she would tell him later about the other gain she would receive from this marriage, although she understood that now he still did not trust her. The heroine suggested discussing the detailed terms of the contract later, when she found a spy as proof of her intentions, and the man, smiling, replied that this suited him. From that moment on, they became partners, so the man suggested having a cup of tea in honor of this, and the girl, thanking him for the offer, said that she had to take her leave, since she had a child waiting for her at home. After she left, the young man looked at the door for some time. The man chuckled out loud, saying that this girl was interesting because she was not at all afraid to be around him. When he asked questions about how this marriage would end, he decided to leave it to fate. Some time passed, and now the main character drove up to her mansion, where she was met by a maid. Jane bowed and informed her mistress that they had changed Hugo's room, and then asked if the heroine wished to look at it. The girl expressed a desire to see, and the maid brought her to the young master's chambers. She told the main character that she had chosen the sunniest room for the sick child. When the blonde asked how long he had slept, the maid replied that he had fallen asleep immediately after taking the medicine, and that it seemed to have worked well. The girl visibly softened and, smiling, commented that it was a huge relief, as she was worried that everything would only get worse. The maid wondered why she had changed so much, assuming that she had suddenly fired the maid because she had something planned. At that moment, the blonde looked at her again and asked if she could do something, and the maid shuddered in surprise. But as a true professional, the woman quickly came to her senses and asked how she could help her mistress. The girl asked if she could take a closer look at Hugo, and, although reluctantly, the woman gave her consent, explaining that the lady did not need her permission, since she was his mother. The main character immediately sat down next to him, mentally thinking that she couldn't believe how such a sweet child could become a tyrant, and decided that she didn't want to see it. She wrung out the cloth and placed the compress on the boy's forehead to help him cope with the fever. Noticing this, the maid became alarmed and exclaimed that she could do it herself, but the heroine assured her that there was nothing to worry about, and she herself wanted to do it for him. The girl wondered what else she could do for Hugo, and asked the maid if there was a stove. The maid showed her where the kitchen was, and the blonde told her that she wanted to cook something tasty for Hugo. Everything was going well, and Leila reported that all that was left was to bake, and the maid was delighted with the main character's skills. At that moment, some strange sounds began to be heard behind the door, and the blonde asked what was going on there. Jane replied that they would check everything right away, and the main character also decided to see what was going on there. It turned out that Countess Marshall had come to them, arguing with the maid and asking her to leave, because the other party had not planned the meeting in advance. The Countess was indignant, saying that she did not need to make arrangements with anyone to visit her own son's house, and the heroine remembered that, in the original, she was Leila's mother-in-law. She was a woman who was not at all disturbed by the death of her son, but suddenly showed up at his home, claiming his wealth. The main character decided for herself that she could not give the inheritance to such a person when she decided to meet her and even served her tea. At the same moment as the girls sat down opposite each other, the Countess noticed that the blonde had become prettier, although the widow should sit quietly in a black dress. The girl paid no attention to her words as the Countess continued to talk about how the other side seemed proud of themselves for getting rid of her son. History said that Count Marshall died of a venereal disease, however. Given Leila's character, many suspected that his death was not an accident. The main character politely asked what brought the Countess here, since it was unlikely that she would have come here just to tell her all this. The woman made a face and asked if Leila was pretending or if she really didn't understand why she had come here. She began gesturing with her hands and said that she had come here because of her son's inheritance, and asked if the girl thought that after his death she would be able to live happily in this house. The blonde again did not react to her insult, and modestly tucking her hair behind her ears, replied that she did not intend to live in this house anymore anyway. But then the atmosphere around her changed, and she replied that, unfortunately, the house still belonged to her and Hugo. The woman lost her temper and asked what she was talking about, because this mansion belonged to the Marshall family, and she had no right to covet something that belonged to the Count's family. The blonde smiled and noticed that the Countess was the only one here who coveted someone else's property, and unfortunately for her, the main character had the will of Viscount Marshall. Graphia flinched and muttered that she had searched the entire mansion, but had not found any will. The heroine smirked, because, as expected, the woman in front of her was more interested in the mansion than in how her own son died. The reason why the Countess couldn't find the will is simple. In the original novel, Leila received the will from the dying Viscount and hid it so that no one would find it. And ironically, it was the villainous Leila who allowed Hugo to inherit the mansion. The girl said out loud that the will was kept in a bank, and the Countess simply would not be able to forge it. This bank is not easy to reach even for the nobility, and the Countess knows well that it is impossible to create a fake will. The girl asked whether the woman wanted to see the will with her own eyes, or to send her the archival records to her mansion, and while saying this, she pretended not to see the distorted expression on the other party's face. At this point, the main character's guest couldn't stand it any longer and, jumping up from her seat, silently left in the end. Everything went too well, even considering that the blonde was already familiar with the plot. But for herself, the main character decided that it was even calmer this way, and Hugo would help her cope with the difficulties. The girl dreamed that the boy would be happy, so now she was trying to establish a connection with him by inviting him to tea. She thought he was very cute, so she looked closely at his face, which the boy could not help but notice. He looked up at her and saw that she was looking at him with disgust, as if she had seen something dirty. The boy was momentarily taken aback and choked, so the blonde offered him some milk to drink. At this point, Hugo suddenly started crying and asking his mother for forgiveness, thinking that it was probably because of him that she had lost her appetite. The girl didn't understand what he meant, and the boy explained that he thought so because she didn't even touch her food, and all because he was sitting opposite her. The heroine realized that she had not thought it through very well, so she would never be able to make him happy while she was in Leila's body. She understood that she needed to show her sincerity, got up from the table, and replied that everything was fine and there was no need to apologize. After that, she came up to him and sat down on her knees in front of him, bowing her head. Hugo is already broken by his stepmother's indifference, and although the heroine decided to make him happy, she never even apologized. So now she decided to fix it, and sincerely asked him for forgiveness for being indifferent to him all this time and allowing the maids to mock him. The girl looked him in the eyes sincerely, and promised that she would not harm him anymore. Then her features contorted with worry again, and she asked him to try to trust her, although this probably didn't sound very convincing. The main character didn't think that Hugo would open up after one apology from her. She just needed to provide him with a happy life full of love and affection, and she vowed out loud to do that for him. The young man was touched and nodded silently, indicating that he understood her intentions. At that moment, the girl took a small box out of her dress pocket. When the boy asked what it was, the woman smiled even brighter and said that it was a gift for him, macaroons and an apron. She said that she thought that the apron would suit him very well, and the young gentleman, taking her gift in his hands, admitted that he liked it very much. The boy tied it around his neck, and the girl complimented him by saying that it looked great and he looked very cute, which made his cheeks blush a little. The hero didn't know why his mother suddenly became so nice to him, but he hoped that it would always be like that. After some time, the main character visited the Duke, who immediately opened the door of his office as if he was waiting for her. The girl greeted him and reported that everything had happened faster than she had planned, although the spy had disappeared immediately after she had left. She didn't know whether he was smart or if his common sense had kicked in. It didn't matter, because either way, the girl was able to catch him by the tail. The heroine provided the Duke with documents in which she described the spy's movements in considerable detail. But since they literally caught him by the tail, he would be able to escape soon, so she was going to go and catch him right now. When she told the young man about her plans, he smiled as if he expected something like this from her. And after that, he expressed a desire to go with her, since it sounded fun. But the girl asked if he was busy at the moment. The young man answered without hesitation that he was completely free now, although the girl could clearly see the huge stack of documents on his desk. But in the end, she decided that if he wanted this, it would only be to her advantage and stated that she did not mind his presence. The young man smiled. After this, they arrived at the appointed place where the spy was probably hiding, but not to gamble, but to meet someone, as the Duke assumed. The blonde pointed to the second floor, saying that they needed to go to the elite guest room. As they headed there, they were stopped by a knight who recognized his lordship, and the man informed him that they had some business on the second floor. The young man doubted whether he could let them in, and asked who the person next to him appeared to him to be, and putting his arm around the blonde, the Duke replied that it was his wife. His plan worked, and the main character mentally admitted that it was good that she went with him, because it was unlikely that they would have let her in if she had been alone. They came to the right door, and the young man asked if the blonde was going to open the door, since they had been just looking at her for some time. The girl wondered if she could handle this spy, because in the original novel, Lucius got into trouble because of him. Due to a spy leaking confidential information about the duchy, it became weakened and was completely divided, including even its knights. At the same time, when the duchy weakened, Leila Marshall abandoned little Hugo. As a result of these events, Hugo became the Duke's successor. But if she marries Lucius Hugo, she will naturally become his adopted son. So she decided that it was okay if this spy had already managed to leave. She told the Duke that she was going to open the door. But at that moment, the young man stopped her and asked her to wait. And thus he saved the girl from injury. Because at that very moment, the man in black suddenly opened the door and ran out of the room. He saw the Duke, who asked him if he understood that it was useless to run away from him. The man looked around in panic, trying to find a way out of this hopeless situation. At that moment, he noticed the blonde, whom he knocked down with his sudden appearance and grabbed her by the collar. The main character screamed in pain, and the young man who came with her removed the confident smile from his face. The spy took the main character hostage, put a knife to her neck, and said that he would kill her if the Duke came near him. Lucius became serious and asked the heroine not to move so that he could save her. His words angered the spy, who with a mad smile said that as soon as he moved, he would cut the blonde's throat. He thought that Lucius would not let him go so easily and would pursue him until the end. But fortunately, it seems that this girl means something to him, since he humbly does everything he says. And since this was the case, the young man had a great chance to kill this bastard in his opinion. Still holding the girl tightly in his arms, he ordered the Duke to turn around and close his eyes, which he silently did. He knew that the spy was going to kill him, and he also knew that there was no point in giving his life for this woman. The man didn't know what to do, namely whether to take a risk and let this woman suffer a little or suffer himself. As soon as the spy realized that the man was not going to do anything, he pushed the main character away from himself and rushed towards the Duke. The girl was not afraid of threats because in her past life her father constantly bullied her. She felt that she simply had to catch the spy who was now going after the Duke and make her new son happy, as she had promised. At the same time, the Duke decided that he could sacrifice one hand, but when he thought that he was about to suffer, everything around suddenly became silent. He opened his eyes and turned around to see that the main character had decided to sacrifice herself and shield him from the blow. The young man could not understand what the girl was thinking at that moment, but decided not to hesitate any longer. When the spy saw that his attack had failed, he wanted to swing at the blonde, but this time Lucius did not allow him to do so. With a practiced movement, he grabbed the spy by the wrist and twisted his arm, after which he asked if the main character was okay. The young man asked her to quickly treat his hand, saying that he would deal with the rest himself, since he did not want her to witness this. When the Duke and the spy were left alone, the man let go of the golden-haired man's hand, and he began to tremble all over with fear. The young man dropped to his knees and roughly grabbed the traitor by the chin, noticing that a minute ago he had been acting very confidently. The man asked if he enjoyed selling the duchy's information, and when the spy began to beg for mercy, Lucius became indignant, saying how dare he beg for mercy when he had already made a mistake. He slapped him and continued to talk about how he should have been prepared for the consequences when he decided to sell information. Lucius began to accumulate mana in his hand and ordered to tell who was behind all this, if, of course, the green-haired one did not want to die. While the young man was extracting information, the blonde managed to bandage her hand and now wondered if Lucius could handle it alone. While the torture continued, the spy thought only about the fact that he could not confess, because if they found out that he had turned them in, there would be no mercy. Deciding that death was better than this outcome, he bit his tongue and committed suicide. The black-haired man cursed, as he had not planned to kill him before he received the information, but no one had guessed that the spy would commit suicide. He decided that this could wait since first he needed to treat Leila's wound, which he began to do. Luckily, the wound was not deep, as the spy was probably surprised by its sudden appearance, but it still hurt. While treating her cut, the young man asked her with a gloomy expression why she did this. The blonde didn't know how to answer at first, because she couldn't say that it was all for the sake of the main character of this novel, Hugo. So after a while, she came up with the best answer, saying that she just didn't want his handsome face to get hurt. The young man, oddly enough, believed her and thanked her, asking her not to do it again. The girl did not understand his request, because thanks to it, they were able to catch the spy. The man agreed, but explained that for some reason he didn't want her to be hurt, playfully suggesting that it might be because she was to become his wife. The girl could not understand whether Lucius always had such a character, because initially he was described as a cold-blooded monster without blood and tears. While she was thinking about this, the man finished bandaging her hand, and the main character thanked him. The man replied that everything was fine, because she got hurt because of him, and the girl smiled. She noted that he not only helped bandage the wound, but also went with her to catch a spy, and the man replied that this was nothing. Some time passed, and the girl finally drove back to the estate, but the man continued to look thoughtfully after the carriage. He wondered why he was so moved by her words, even though girls often told him that he was handsome, but he felt nothing. While he was trying to sort out his mixed feelings, knights began to emerge from the training ground and noticed the protagonist. The red-haired girl wondered out loud what was wrong with him, and one of the knights suggested that something good had happened since he was smiling. Or the Duke is thinking about how to kill someone, because for what other reason could a man smile like that? They walked past him, not even realizing that all this time their master had been thinking about a blonde, and that the man was smiling, looking into space, because he felt strange in a good way, thinking about this girl. The next day, the main character received a letter asking when she would arrive, because the sender was bored and could not wait for their meeting. He also asked if she would show up before his head fell off, and apparently this letter was from Lucius. But the girl noticed that his manner of communication was somehow strange, as he looked like a puppy showing affection to his owner. In any case, the girl planned to come to him in the near future, but this is even better. She sat down at her desk and began writing a reply, asking if she could visit him that evening. After some time, the young man received her message and wrote a short note saying that he would be glad to see her at any time. Once she received permission, the protagonist turned to her maid named Jane, and she asked if the maid could prepare a carriage so that she could go to the Duke's mansion. The woman replied that she didn't think there was anything to cook and asked the blonde to look outside. When the heroine looked out the window, she saw a whole flower carriage. The maid behind her explained that the Duke had sent her, and that this carriage had definitely not existed before. The blonde couldn't believe that Lucius was trying to act romantic, but she decided not to dwell on it and go get ready, not forgetting to ask to tell the coachman to get ready to leave. After all the preparations, the girl finally reached the Duke's office, who immediately greeted her. The man immediately asked what condition the girl's hand was in, and she replied that everything had already become much better. The young man said that he was glad to hear this because she had no idea how scared he was because his wife was not sending news. The girl thought that he was deceiving her, but the Duke asked her with a smile why she thought so. The main character stared at him in amazement and said that he looked like a puppy. This did not offend the young man in the least, who asked if he was at least a male in her mind, but the girl replied that he looked like a female. The Duke pretended to be very upset by her statement, commenting that he did not seem to be as attractive as a man. At that moment, the girl remembered why she had come here and, taking out the document, asked the Duke to read the contract and ask questions. Although the young man picked it up, he decided not to read it, as he did not want to discuss work. The black-haired man smiled and asked to tell what the heroine had been doing all this time while they had not seen each other. The girl couldn't believe that he was really interested, but his face said that she had to answer. So the girl revealed that during this time she had been baking various desserts, and this shocked the man. When she went on to talk about baking various cookies and macarons, her listener asked if that meant she loved eating sweets as much as she loved cooking. The girl smiled and admitted that she actually loved sweets, but this time she didn't eat them, but someone else did. The atmosphere around the protagonist immediately changed and, hiding his expression, he asked who the sweets were intended for. He continued to question her about who she gave them to since he himself received nothing. The girl thought that he liked sweets and suggested that next time she send him some too, telling him that this time she made sweets for Hugo. When the man became tense and asked who this Hugo was to her, the girl replied that he was her son, who would soon become his son. The man breathed a sigh of relief and noted that she had indeed mentioned her son. The girl noted for herself that this Duke was very different from his character from the novel. She offered to discuss the contract, saying that it would really be for 1 year, and that it had only one condition. The blonde briefly told him that he should adopt Hugo and should perceive him as his heir and his own son. Thanks to his upbringing, Hugo will receive a ring just like the original, and then Lucius will perceive him as his own son. The young man agreed, and when the girl suggested that he add his own conditions, the man replied that he wanted them to behave like a real couple. In other words, he wanted to agree not to meet with other people. And this statement surprised the main character a little. But in the end, she decided that she didn't care about other men anyway and agreed with him. When the girl was adding amendments to their contract, the young man asked her to sign the marriage certificate. The girl wondered whether it was necessary to report to the state, since they would divorce in a year anyway. Without changing his expression, the man explained that if he was going to do something, then he would do it according to the rules, and although he was not going to get married, he would try for a year. The main character couldn't understand why a certificate was needed for this, but decided not to argue. At that moment, when the girl was just about to sign the document, a woman burst into the room. She asked if Lucius was really going to get married, and the blonde immediately recognized her as the Duke's mother. The main character didn't know what to do if the woman in front of her spoke out against the engagement. With a blank face, the woman approached the girl and asked if she was the one her son was marrying. The blonde confirmed this and carefully noted that she had not yet signed the contract. She wanted to apologize for not warning Madame, but the woman interrupted her and ordered her to stop chatting. The woman snapped her finger and ordered the servants to enter, and various boxes in festive wrappings began to be brought into the room. The girl, who still couldn't come to her senses, asked what all this meant. The former Duchess approached her and said that she could not greet her daughter-in-law empty-handed, after which she asked what shoes and dresses she liked. She opened one of the boxes, and there was her favorite necklace, which looked great on her too, so she hoped that they had the same taste. The woman continued to talk about how she was upset every time her son kicked women out, saying he didn't want to get married, and this was her gratitude to the main character. The man believed that they were destined to find their person. But Leila no longer listened to him, and, thanking the former Duchess, said that she had already received many gifts from the Duke. The dark-haired woman asked if it was too rude to call her husband by his title, advising her to call him by his first name. When the main character glanced at him, the young man smiled and said that he didn't mind. The girl knew that in this world nothing is done for free, and a man might later ask for an unfair favor. While she was thinking about this, the Duchess spoke again and commented that she felt like the girl in front of her was getting dizzy. She smiled confidently and wondered what her daughter-in-law was thinking when it was just a gift for being adorable. At this point, the girl decided to admit that she had a not very good past, and that she was getting married for the second time, and after her announcement, mother and son could not hide their tense faces. But, to the girl's surprise, the Duchess replied that her past did not matter, and if her son loved Leila, then she would love her too. The Duchess believes that any mother would do the same, so if something is bothering her, such as her background, she can tell her. She assured her that the girl could trust her, because the Jupert family would not tolerate people who disrespected the family. In her past life, the main character didn't even dream of getting married. She lived without a mother and suffered because of her father, who traumatized her in every possible way. So she decided that it was all for the best, and she could live with the fact that no one was trying to make their lives difficult. While the Duchess was looking at what jewelry looked good and what dress to choose as a gift, her son looked with wide eyes at the smile of his bride. When the Duchess left them, the young man sat down next to the girl and asked if everything was okay. The main character replied that everything was fine, explaining that she was just not used to this and therefore felt a little awkward. She couldn't help but imagine if someone like her would receive unconditional love if she had a mother. When the man in front of her heard her words, he asked why she felt awkward. The girl closed her eyes and admitted that she was just a little jealous of seeing such love, since she had no family. The man smiled and, placing his hand on hers, assured her that there was no need to be upset anymore, because after the wedding, they would become family to each other. The main character found this funny, and agreeing with him, she laughed, thinking that only a year had passed, but now she had a family. When the young man saw her smile again that evening, he was as stunned as the first time. He squeezed her hand tighter and with a smile offered to extend the contract for 100 years. The Duke admitted that he did not want to part with her after a year, and the girl asked in panic if he was joking. The man wiped the smile off his face and assured her that he was quite serious in his desire. At first there was an awkward pause between them, after which the girl pulled her hand away from him, which upset him and changed the subject. Leila asked if he had any more time, and again, as if nothing had happened, the young man smiled and replied that he still had time for her. The girl pulled out the letter and explained to the young man that it was an invitation. She couldn't understand why he was acting as if he was seeing him for the first time and asked about it. The young man looked away and with a tense expression replied that he recognized this invitation because he had also received it. The main character smiled again and said that she had to attend the event, asking to join her. After that, there was an awkward pause between them because the man didn't seem to be going to answer her. When the main character insisted on an answer, the young man hesitated and then told the girl the reason for his indecision. And the girl couldn't help but exclaim in surprise after he told her that he had thrown away the invitation. Leila was a little upset by this and said out loud that she had come to the conclusion that he had not intended to go there. The young man surprised her again by answering that he would still go with her, even after he threw away the invitation. The girl didn't want to force him, so she said that there was nothing to worry about, and he could take anyone he wanted as a partner. Her words touched the Duke, who, with an upset expression on his face, asked who the heroine would go with if not with him. The main character couldn't understand why he was upset, but she put that thought aside and said that she hadn't thought about it yet. The young man smiled coldly and began to insist that instead of going with someone else, he wanted to go with her. The girl calmly commented that she would then consider it an honor to receive his consent, after which she asked what he was squeezing in his hand. The main character saw where she was looking, and happily satisfied her curiosity since he was not hiding anything anyway. When the blonde saw the gun, she asked permission to look at it closer. And when the man nodded, the girl began to admire the work of a true master with delight. While she was deeply immersed in this, Leila did not notice how her future husband came close to her face and asked if she wanted to try shooting a pistol. After the girl clarified whether she could do this and received a positive answer, she did not hesitate for a second. Her skills impressed the Duke, who praised her and said that she had excellent aim and good posture, noting that if the bullet had been fired, it would have shattered the window. The young man asked warily when she learned to hold a gun like that, and the heroine replied that she learned when she was still a child. In fact, she practiced to shoot her own father one day. But in her past life, she was never able to kill him because she managed to die herself. The man in front of her did not focus on this and advised her to shoot using a ring attached to the barrel of the gun. The ring was a circular substance that came out of the human body that was known for its powerful destructive power. It was also said to have infinite potential, depending on who uses it. The man continued to talk about how once the ring hits the target, it will return to the person who released it, making the ring much more convenient than bullets. Not everyone can use it, which makes it extremely rare in the original. After 8 years, Hugo created 3 rings, but the men in front of the girl easily created many of these rings. While the girl was wondering who this man really was, Lucius sadly tilted his head to the side, asking if she liked the rings more than his face since she couldn't tear herself away from them. The more the main character looked at him, the more she became convinced that he looked like a puppy. Unable to contain her impulse, Leila reached out and stroked the man's head, not even hiding the fact that she treated him like a puppy. And if outwardly the young man pretended to be dissatisfied, in fact, if you look closer, you could notice his reddened ears. When the main character arrived back at her estate, she was informed that Mr. Hugo was in his room. At this moment, a maid named Jane noticed something in the heroine's hands and asked what it was, causing a smile to appear on her mistress's face. The girl replied that it was a treat for Hugo, and Jane was glad to see that Leila really cared about the little gentleman. The woman wiped the smile off her face and advised him not to give him too many sweets, because with obesity comes serious diseases. The blonde nodded obediently, replying that next time she would try not to give anything, although she thought that her son was too thin. Finally, the girl reached the room of the novel's hero and asked permission to enter. The child, clearly nervous, asked to wait a minute, after which he opened the door for her. The main character was a little taken aback by his strange behavior, as he was clearly hiding something from her. When she asked what he was doing, the black-haired man hesitated and briefly replied that he had nothing to do. Deciding that she was just imagining things, the main character changed the subject and said that she had bought chocolate pudding. She offered him a try, and the child could not refuse, although he felt a little awkward. The girl said that it was a gift from a famous pastry chef, so it must be very tasty. When the boy tried the dessert, he could not contain his excitement, commenting that it was very tasty. At this point, he noticed his stepmother watching him closely and hesitantly offered her some of the pudding. The blonde was pleasantly surprised to think that they were finally starting to get closer. But at that moment, she noticed that the boy's hands were shaking, and this suggested that he did not trust her. And yet, despite this, he tried to get closer to the main character. Smiling bitterly, the girl wondered what she should do and how to repay him for his courage. The main character decided not to refuse his offer and tried the sweets from his hands, which made the child happy. The girl understood that he was probably afraid that she might find a reason to reject his proposal. But she decided that it was nothing to worry about, and that in 1 year she would make Hugo truly happy. The main character smiled and asked if the boy liked her treat, and when he nodded happily, she invited him to go for a walk. Leila continued to say that if he was not busy now, they could go and ride on the swings that he had loved so much before her words had a negative effect on him. He trembled all over, thinking that she was trying to hurt his feelings as before. After all, it was Mrs. Marshall who said the swing was ugly and ordered it to be taken down. The swing in the garden was one of Hugo's favorite things, but Mrs. Marshall ordered it to be destroyed. Many years later, when Hugo becomes emperor, he will return to this estate where he spent his childhood before he was expelled, and he will weave the tree branches together again to make his favorite swing that was destroyed. The girl understood that everything was because the wounds received in childhood are not so easy to heal. The main character looked at the child tenderly and said that the swing had been fixed. The young gentleman could not believe his luck, and the girl suggested that he look at them together. When they arrived at the place, the main character asked him if he liked the new swing, and the boy, who had impatiently approached them, turned around and smiled joyfully at his stepmother, admitting that he was very happy. When the child sat on the new swing, the girl began to gently swing him and then started a conversation with him. Leila made a guilty expression and said that she had caused Hugo a lot of pain after his father's death, and so she promised to try to prevent all the horror that he had to go through in the future, and repairing this swing is her first step as an apology. After listening to her, the boy smiled bitterly and said that he also had a gift for his mother. The main character did not expect this at all, and even asked again in a fit of surprise. The boy assured me that this was indeed the case and hurried after him, causing him to trip and scratch his knees. His stepmother sat down next to him excitedly and asked if everything was okay, to which the boy nodded. Leila remembered that as a child she also hid her pain because she was afraid that she would be punished, and the reason she wanted Hugo to be happy was not only because he was her favorite character, but also because their lives were very similar. So she decided that what she couldn't get from her father, she would give to Hugo so that he would feel the love that the girl never received. When she hugged him tightly, the girl assured him that it was not his fault, that he was in pain, and next time he did not need to hide anything to himself, but should just tell her. The girl promised that she would do everything so that Hugo would receive the love that he deserved because he was so innocent and kind. After the boy calmed down, the girl let him go, believing that even when Hugo cried, he did not lose his childish charm. Leila smiled in winter and suggested going back because his knees needed to be checked and treated with special solutions. At this moment, the child began to shift hesitantly from foot to foot, after which he called out to the main character. The girl turned to him and asked what he wanted, and the black-haired boy admitted that he wanted to hold her hand. The main character opened her eyes in surprise when she learned that the boy wanted to walk, holding her hand. But after a moment of confusion, she smiled sweetly as she found his desire charming. The girl asked if she could hold his hand, and the boy nodded quickly with shining eyes. After this, the couple, consisting of a mother and her adopted son, slowly walked back to the mansion holding hands. When they reached the main character's room, he quickly pulled out a small object from one of the drawers and hid it behind his back. The boy expressed his concern because he did not know whether his mother would like his gift, and the girl smiled tenderly. She stroked his head and assured him that there was nothing to worry about and that she would be happy with whatever he gave her. At this moment, the main character of the novel made up his mind and handed the girl a rose decorated with a bow. Now, Leila finally found out what he had been doing in secret in his room, and thought that even though he still didn't trust his stepmother, he had made such a wonderful gift. Hugo raised his head and said that his mother gave him macarons, chocolate pudding, even a swing, and compared to the main character, his gift was very modest. As soon as he finished speaking, the girl refuted his words, sincerely thanking him for this wonderful gift, which she really liked. When the young gentleman saw the Viscountess's smile, he could not restrain himself and called out to her. But at the moment when the girl asked what was the matter, the boy did not dare to admit that it was the first time he saw her smile, and mentally expressed the hope that she would smile more often. The next morning, the main character found herself back in the Duke's mansion, and as soon as they sat down, the girl handed him a formal contract. The young man did not read it right away because he did not want to immediately start a conversation on such official topics. But the girl, with a serious expression on her face, noticed that this contract was very important. The main character, who was watching her closely, noticed that Leila was finally drinking, and after these words, the girl looked at him questioningly. Realizing that the heroine did not understand what he meant, the young man explained that she did not drink even the most famous teas, but as expected, she loves sweets. Only then did the girl realize that instead of tea, she was served cocoa with marshmallow, which the man later mentioned he had prepared especially for her. The girl noticed that the man was happy to see her surprised expression and asked him to sign the document quickly. The man did this without delay and, pointing to the document, announced that he was keeping it. This time, the main character was not surprised and simply asked if it would be better to put it in the bank. And when the young man answered that there was no place in the empire safer than his home, she immediately believed him and asked the next question. The girl asked the young man if he remembered the ring she had mentioned last time, and the man nodded. She thought that if Hugo gets the ring earlier than it happened in the original, then he will have much less problems. And of course, Lucius knows the most about the ring. The main character asked with a serious expression how many rings a person could use, and the man remarked that she seemed very curious to hear about it. When the Viscountess didn't fall for his playful tone, the young man looked down thoughtfully as if he was considering something. After a pause, he looked at her again and said that people with the surname Upert are already born with a predisposition towards them, and they all think that they will easily master the rings. The girl understood that the Duke wanted to say that not everyone with the surname Juppé could get hold of the ring, and the man confirmed this, saying that if such a person did not get hold of the ring, he would most likely become an outcast in the family. Lucius conquered the entire duchy, so the girl believed that there was no need to doubt his skills, since he did everything better than anyone else. The main character asked if Lucius could show her the ring again, and the man happily fulfilled her wish. After 8 years of hard work, Hugo had created 3 rings, and by the time he became emperor, he could make 7. But the man in front of the main character was no less amazing than the hero of the novel she had read about. The girl realized that she had made the right choice, and asked if people not from the Upert family could receive rings, and the man, thoughtfully scratching his chin, replied that it was possible, and he added that the ring is very sensitive, so there are not so many such people. And after his words, the girl thought that she could help Hugo if she learned to control the ring, so she asked if she could do it. The young man smiled and confidently looked at the main character and replied that he could teach her. When the main character looked at him with hope, the man said that he had one condition, and the girl pricked up her ears, urging him on. At that moment, the young man touched his lips with his index finger and asked if she would kiss him for the favor. The girl became extremely disappointed and, looking sternly at him, demanded to know if this was a joke. The man felt awkward and looked away, after which he replied that he would be glad to at least see her more often. This immediately diffused the situation, and the girl, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, said that they would see each other when he had time. The Duke looked at her again and said that they could see each other every day since he always had time for her. The girl saw perfectly well that he was busy and asked how many people in the mansion could control the ring. Then the man said that about 3 people had this ability, and the girl knew that they were Roxana, Rutger, and another man named Kazette. The heroine remembered that in the original it was they who told Hugo about the ring. The girl asked the young man to introduce her to these people, but the man flatly refused to do so. Then Leila was surprised and asked what the reason was, and the hero admitted that he liked being alone with her, and he did not want to ruin this idyll. The Viscountess was not at all embarrassed by his words, and clutching her chin, she reminded him that they would soon be getting married, and that she would still meet them. These words had a huge impact on the always cool Duke, and he was unable to argue with her. Some time passed from that moment, and as promised, Lucius sent a letter to his subordinates. One of the knights who received the letter burst into the training center, after which he reported that the note said that His Highness Mr. Jupert was getting married, and they needed to return as soon as possible. The girl with red hair also read the letter carefully and said that, judging by the text, the time for the wedding had indeed come. But then she suggested that it could just be a metaphor, and he wanted to create a new union, and the man agreed with her because he believed that the gentleman would never love a woman. At that moment, when they were sure that they were right, the gentleman entered the training center with a girl unknown to them. The man, not paying attention to them, turned to his partner and, pointing to the knights, said that they were the ones who knew how to control the ring. The young people froze in place because they could not believe that the cold-blooded and cruel Duke could smile like that. The knights under the Duke's command watched as their master familiarly placed his hand on the blonde's shoulder and smiled at her, which seemed like a real dream. The protagonist ignored their strange reaction and allowed himself to introduce them to the girl. He just turned to the girl to see her reaction and noticed how she was looking intently at the young men. The young man couldn't even imagine that the girl already knew their names thanks to the description of their appearance from the novel. At this point, the man could not stand it and asked why the girl was looking at them so intently. He immediately pointed his finger at one of the knights because he saw him as a rival and asked what she thought of him. The girl was indignant, not understanding why the man was asking her about this, even though he hadn't even introduced himself yet. The young man mumbled whether it was necessary to do this at all, after which he replied that the knight could simply be called whatever he wanted, for example, hey or hey you. The protagonist noticed that the girl he was accompanying avoided his gaze, but continued to say that nothing terrible would happen if she treated that knight rudely. As if nothing had happened, the Duke looked at the young men again and introduced a girl named Roxana, who was the leader of the knights. It was illogical because Lucius had treated the male knight so badly before, which made him think it was out of jealousy. When the main characters finally left this place, a knight named Rutger asked what happened to the master in his absence, and the girl with red hair named Roxanne asked if he thought that something could happen to Lucius at all. She's been his advisor for 10 years, but she still doesn't understand why he needs security at all. The young man agreed with her, adding that besides, she was only able to summon one ring anyway. The girl grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and asked if he wanted to check how well she handled this ring. After all, in her opinion, he had been on the campaign for so long that his brain had turned to mush, because she did not understand why else he was saying things he shouldn't. Rutger realized that he had said too much and asked for forgiveness, and the girl decided to leave him alone for now, ordering him to begin his report. At this point, the young man became serious and admitted that he had found no traces. Roxanne got angry and slammed her fist on a hard surface nearby, asking if that meant he had missed them. The knight, when checking her words, said that he had carefully explored the entire area for several days and even used the ring. The man remembered that the other guys were also going on a search, including their child with a melanin deficiency, and the girl thought about it. Just at that moment, She turned her head in the other direction and noticed the Hizette who had just returned and also empty-handed. A young man named Rutger swore because it was not good at all, and only the knight who came did not understand what was going on. Some time has passed since then, and now the main character has arrived at the banquet. A few days before the Hillen family party, the girl looked through all the letters collected in the mansion, in order to get information about nobles whom she did not yet know, and among them there was one very strange name. It was an anonymous postcard that looked like a fan letter, and the girl assumed it could be the man in front of her. When the blue-haired girl greeted Viscountess Leila, the main character reciprocated by saying that she was glad to see Lady Nepheli. Nepheli giggled playfully and asked to call her simply Edith, and politely agreeing, the heroine remembered that the girl with blue hair was a famous socialite. While she was thinking about this, Edith became no closer and, asking forgiveness for her rudeness, asked if she could find out something. And at that moment, Edith's face became extremely cold, and she asked if the rumors were true that Leila was getting married again. To some extent, heroine expected such questions, so she smiled and answered that she was indeed getting married. The ladies nearby heard her and began to whisper among themselves, saying that only a little time had passed since her husband had passed away. They thought that it seemed like the heroine was trying by any means possible to enter aristocratic society. The girl, as if not noticing their words, turned to the lady in front of her and remarked that she seemed to be very close to the Rupert family, since these rumors had reached her so quickly. The lady with blue hair was in a stupor because she could not understand what the Rupert family had to do with it and asked about it. And only a second later, it dawned on her that the blonde in front of her was apparently getting married to Duke Rupert. People around could not understand how she managed to do this, because the Duke had even rejected the princess's proposal. When Edith heard them, she immediately turned to them and asked them to stop whispering because the lady was uncomfortable. The girl with blue hair continued to talk to the heroine, saying that she was not at all surprised, because the Lady Marshal possessed an amazing charm capable of captivating even Duke Rupert. She took the main character by the arm, and the girl couldn't help but wonder if Edith was like this in the original. Leila politely thanked the girl for the compliment and tried to carefully free herself from her tenacious grip. She felt very uncomfortable and said that she had something to do, but would be back soon. She thought that something was wrong here, and it would be better not to get involved in it for now and just move away as far as possible. While the main character was hiding in one of the corners of the hall, she noticed a man who for some reason did not leave her mind. It had the Blake family crest on it, and the girl assumed it was Baron Doug Blake, although she wasn't entirely sure because it wasn't on the original. Her heart went cold as she couldn't understand why he seemed so familiar to her. At that moment, the man noticed her gaze on him and headed in her direction. The girl was sure that Baron Blake was not familiar with the Lady Marshal, but he nevertheless approached, and asking forgiveness for this, asked a question. Feeling a bad premonition in her soul, the girl heard the Baron asking her if they had met by chance before. At first, the heroine did not know what to do, but quickly realized that she had to make a calm decision, because in the book, Leila had never met this man. Keeping a serene smile on her face, the blonde replied that there was no way they could have known each other. The man replied that this could not be, but still decided to retreat, asking for forgiveness for disturbing him. While he was leaving, the girl tried to figure out why she felt uncomfortable, as she had the feeling that he was somehow connected to her. She suggested that it might be because he was the same age as her father. While she was thinking about this, the girl did not notice how her future husband came up to her, grabbed her hand, and kissed her knuckles. The blonde was outraged and asked why he allowed himself to do such obscenities in front of the public. Not paying attention to the fact that she was angry with him, the man smiled and admitted that he missed her. The girl said that not even a day had passed since their last meeting, since only yesterday he introduced her to Rutger and Roxana. The man squeezed her hand even tighter and, bringing his face closer to hers, said that it seemed like an eternity had passed. The main character couldn't believe that he took her hand right there, but she quickly calmed down. She thought that while they were in the corner, no one would notice them, and only then did she realize that everyone was staring at them. She felt uncomfortable and quietly told the black-haired man that everyone was looking at them. The main character smiled and asked what difference it made, because in any case, he was hers and she was his. Everyone who heard them was shocked by his statement, but most of all, of course, the main character. She blushed and, to hide it, turned around, saying that everyone was looking at them and they'd better find another place. The young man agreed with her, but before that, he asked her if she liked wrinkled, hairy men with hanging bellies. The girl was genuinely amazed and asked him to explain what he was talking about. But then she assumed he meant the man with red hair she had recently spoken to. The black-haired young man approached the girl again and said that she looked as if she'd been bothered by that man for a long time. With a gloomy expression on his face, the man added that they even talked in private. Only then did the main character realize that the Duke was jealous of her towards that pot-bellied guy. The main character felt incredibly funny at this discovery, and noticing this, the Duke asked what made her laugh so much. Having laughed heartily, the girl replied that she really had nothing to do with this baron. When the young man in front of her was convinced of her sincerity, he pressed her palm to his cheek and asked her to stop looking around and pay more attention to him. This capricious behavior did not spoil the girl's mood at all, since she thought that he behaved like a cute puppy. After they sorted out the situation, the young people decided to go out onto the balcony. The young man threw his jacket over the girl, and the girl asked why he was so late today. The protagonist replied that he had some things to do, and when the girl insisted on an answer, he said that he was looking for something, but in the end, he never found it. The girl remembered that if there was something that Lucius was looking for now, it was undoubtedly a shadow. This is what they called the distorted ring, or otherwise the void in the novel, and, unlike ordinary rings, voids do not return to their creator but wander in the air. Find a normal ring, the void adjoins it and absorbs its energy, and as a result the ring loses its power, which is why ring users have repeatedly filed complaints. She remembered that Rutger and Cosette were tasked with finding shadows, but it was not an easy task. At that moment, the girl remembered that she had not seen Cosette today and thought that she needed to meet him at least once. The girl didn't have time to finish her thought because she saw a girl with red hair, whom she immediately recognized. She thought that the most important character in the restoration of the Yupert mine had finally appeared. Thinking about this, she jumped up from her seat, but was stopped by a young man next to her who asked where she was going. The girl replied that Mrs. Hiln had arrived and that she needed to go to her to return his mine, but even after that, the man did not let her go and spoke again. The young man asked to hear his request before this, and the girl asked what it was. Duke Jupert also stood up from his seat and approached the main character. He smiled brightly and, like last time, asked the girl to kiss him. While the main character couldn't understand whether he was really serious, a girl with blue hair was watching them. Judith admitted to herself that she thought their engagement was just for show, but it seemed that Leila was truly in love with Duke Jupert. The concept of love was still a completely inappropriate word for Leila Marshall. However, everything changed, and the girl thought that it was still interesting, and she liked the current Leila Marshall more than the old one. At the same time, the main character did not allow the young man to kiss her. She bowed her head and asked for forgiveness, saying that this would not work and that she felt that nothing would work out between them. Leila pointed to the knight who had been waiting for his master all this time and warned that they would meet later. The girl explained that everyone had their own things to do now, so it would be better for them to go their separate ways, and she would return his clothes to him later. Before the young man could find anything to say, the heroine quickly left, leaving him completely alone on the balcony. She headed straight for her target and called out to Mrs. Helen, who turned to face her when she heard her name. The lady immediately recognized Miss Marshall and said she had heard that she was getting married again, so she congratulated her on the event. The main character thanked her, and at that moment noticed that the girl with red hair had been looking somewhere behind her the whole time. The Viscountess saw that Helen was looking at a red-haired young man with the surname Dawson, and as it seemed to her they were not on very good terms, the girl could not hide her hostility. The main character knew that their relationship was strained, but she did not expect that the girl would control her facial expressions so poorly and would show disapproval so openly. The blonde called out to Miss Helen, thus tearing her out of her thoughts, and the girl, coming to her senses, asked the heroine to address her informally, and Leila nodded in agreement. The girl understood that she had to somehow change places and offer to talk to her. However, it seemed to her that the girl with red hair wanted to watch Dawson rather than talk to her. When she thought about this, Helen looked at the main character again and said that she wanted to know about marriage. The blonde made it clear that she was listening to her, and the girl admitted that she thought Leila was supporting Duke Jupert and was planning to remarry him. The main character was amazed by her intelligence and asked how she knew about it. And the girl, smiling, replied that she understood this, because the Duke was looking at her intently. Leila again compared him to a lost puppy, and turning away from him with a red face, suggested a change of scenery. The blonde said that she needed to talk about something regarding the girl with red hair, and she nodded and asked to follow her. They found a secluded place where they could talk alone, and Helen asked the heroine what was the matter. The girl asked to be called simply Leila, after which she asked if Helen wanted to take a leading position. Since she was reading the novel, the girl hit the nail on the head, and the panicked lady before the days excitedly asked for what reason she brought her here. The main character's face became serious, and she asked the other party to calm down, saying that she just wanted to come to an agreement because she thought she was ideal for the position of head of the family. The girl with red hair came to her senses and carefully noted that she needed to think. And then she added that even if the main character's words were sincere, there was no guarantee that she would be able to carry it out and put her in such a position. The blonde nodded and said that she understood her concerns, but promised that she had the power to give her what she wanted and they could come to an agreement. Her confidence impressed Helen, and she also smiled and asked what the girl wanted in return for helping her. The main character smirked and replied that when Helen became the head of the family, the black diamond mine that Dawson received would belong to her, so Leila wanted to ask for this mine to be transferred to her. The blonde also promised that exactly 1 year later, she would put the red-haired girl on top. Helen, who wanted to call her Madam again, changed her mind and agreed to call her simply by her first name, shaking her hand. While the main character was mining for her future husband, the hero was thoughtfully looking at the banquet hall until he was called out. It was his knight who began to complain that his master was ignoring him, but the man replied that he did not want to hear from someone who had disturbed his peace with Leila. After his words, Rutger felt uneasy and his whole body trembled from fear that the master would punish him. At that moment, the Duke turned sharply in the other direction and called out to the knight, asking him to call Roxana as he had found a shadow. The young man felt uneasy leaving his master alone and asked if he could manage without him, and the black-haired man replied that Roxana would be enough. He continued to talk about how the knight should take care of Leila and return, and after receiving a positive answer from Rutgeru, he left. When the young man found his future mistress, he reported to her that the Duke had gone away on business. The girl asked for details, and Rutger, smiling tensely, said that he had urgent business and asked him to take care of her. The knight also added that Lady Leila could skip the formalities and address him by name, and the girl nodded. Although she smiled outwardly, the girl understood that Lucius had not just suddenly left the banquet, and if it was urgent, it meant he was tracking the shadows. As if reading her thoughts, Rutger added that the Duke had left with Roxana, so the girl had nothing to worry about. The man added that, of course, it would be better if he and Kizette went together, but he had to look after the heroine, and Kizette was not at the event today. The young man explained that Kizette was one of their knights, whom the blonde had not yet met since he had left on business that day. Hyseth was the second most popular character after Hugo in the original story, so it was a shame not to see him last time. She was curious if she would be able to see him this time, and so she asked the young man to introduce him to her, as she wanted to get to know him better and learn about his skills, which she'd only read about. At that moment, the young man she was thinking about was looking thoughtfully at the night sky. While he was thinking, the knight who had recently spoken with the main character entered his room without knocking. He greeted the Kizette joyfully and asked if he had locked himself in his room all alone again, and the man responded by asking him to leave. The young man used his ring skills without hesitation, and Rutger asked irritably if he was going to kill him or worse. Kizette replied that it was disturbing his thoughts, and the other knight asked what he could be talking about at such a late hour. When the white-haired man asked if he really knew nothing, Rutger suggested that he had gone away from everyone to think about his behavior, and the hero replied that he was just trying to remember what he might have missed. Rutger decided to ignore his words and asked him to come out for a minute if he was interested in finding out what awaited him. The young man did not fall for his words and again pointed the ring at him, saying that this was not his responsibility. The other side got nervous again and asked not to cut him out and again reminded that she came here with a surprise for him. At that moment, the blonde came out from behind him and greeted Kizette with one of her best smiles. The girl immediately recognized him because in the original he was Hugo's mentor, and they were close, almost like brothers. But as a fan of Hugo, the main character didn't like Kizette because it's hard to love him. The man with gray hair did not pay attention to her and repeated his question again, why the other knight had come, and he said that if he offended this lady, he would be in trouble. The girl did not pay any attention to his rudeness and came closer to him, saying that she was pleased to meet her. They shook hands as the girl introduced herself and explained that she would soon marry their master. Cosette turned back to Rutger and asked if His Excellency had returned, to which the young man replied that during the ball he had noticed the infected ring and so had gone to look for Roxana. The mention of this upset the man with gray hair, and seeing this, Rutger said that there was no need to be sad because there was another mission for him. His words interested the young man, and he impatiently asked what instructions he was given next. But his dreams were shattered, as the other side informed him that he needed to go for a walk with Lady Leila. Some time passed, and the young man again appeared before the girl, asking for forgiveness for keeping her waiting. The girl assured him that it was okay since he would return quickly anyway. She noticed that he was in his uniform and remembered that Rutger was afraid that Cosette would blame himself for the failure of his mission. So, to cheer him up, the girl ordered him to take a walk with her, and was glad to see that the Hyzit was the same as in the novel. When the young people began their leisurely walk, a silence formed between them, which made the girl feel awkward. The heroine turned to him and asked if Lucius was always so busy, and the young man replied that he had more to do than most of the knights in the order. She became curious about what the Duke usually did, and Cosette told her that on the last mission they were looking for a dark magic stone that belonged to the Juperts. Even though the main character already knew a lot from the novel she had read, she couldn't help but call it incredible. The young man agreed with her, but added that almost all the stones in the mine were just pieces of coal and that magic stones had poor compatibility with rings. The man's next words made the heroines listen, as he said that using them directly was not practical, and that sorting them would take a lot of time and would be expensive, which would complicate the sale. The girl thought that she needed to come up with a way to make the work of managing the magic stone mine more efficient. Leila's escort knight noticed how her mood had rapidly risen and asked what had made her so happy. The main character smiled and replied that she might soon give Lucius a nice gift. After her words, the young man next to her shuddered and hid his expression from her, which the heroine noticed. The man with gray hair replied that nothing terrible had happened. He had just imagined something for a second. The girl thought that he was tired and that she had taken too much of his time, but the hero assured her that everything was fine. A few days later, the mother of her first husband came to the main character and asked if the girl had brought the will. The woman felt quite comfortable and demanded to read the document because she felt that the blonde was bluffing. Leila calmly handed it over, and as time went on, while she read it, Madame's composure crumbled before her eyes. She tore it to pieces and said that Leila had not only interfered in their family's affairs, but was now also trying to take their property with the help of a forged document. The main character did not succumb to her provocation and replied that it was indeed a fake, and that the woman tore up the copy when the original had already been taken from the bank vault. The blonde asked if Madame needed a real document as proof, and the woman became indignant, asking how she dared laugh at her. When the main character replied that she was not laughing at her, the brunette trembled with indignation and called her a fallen woman. The girl's face immediately became stern, and she asked if the woman had heard about her potential remarriage partner. The woman did not understand what she was talking about, and the heroine said that she would soon marry the Duke, and from now on she was a lady, and her name would be Duchess Leila Eupert, and the mother of her first husband was only Marshal Marcel, so she must be treated with due respect as a duchess. The brunette couldn't understand when she managed to charm Duke Jupert, but she knew that she was right, and that she couldn't go against Duke Jupert's feelings. The main character, not paying attention to the stunned state of the other side, said that she had a proposal for Lady Marshall. The woman's behavior in front of her immediately changed, and Marcel carefully asked what she wanted. The blonde, without hiding her contempt, thought that, surprisingly, her ex-husband's mother could change her attitude so abruptly. Throwing aside thoughts of this, the girl said that she needed two things. The first was permission from her family for a direct trip to the Kingdom of Nixon, and the second was custody of Hugo. The woman could not believe that this was all the girl needed, because only the Hill family was involved in trade with the Nixon family. So the travel permit was of little value to the woman. Besides, in her opinion, the shy and weak Hugo would be of no use, even though he was her grandson. The blonde continued to talk about how she would take them away and provide fair compensation. Madame thought that since she didn't know what Leila could offer, it was better to pretend to be upset in order to get more. The woman replied that she didn't really want to give them to the main character and asked what she could offer in return. The girl pretended to think about how she would settle accounts with her ex-mother-in-law, and then I remembered that Duke Jupert had recently acquired a mine of black magic stones. The main character asked if it would be enough if she gave it to the woman, and she asked if she really wanted to give the mine to her. After all, the mine with precious stones was of great value, and she thought that Leila did not realize what a loss it was. Since she was slow to answer, the blonde asked again if she agreed, and the brunette quickly agreed. The woman yelled at the maid and ordered her to quickly bring the contract so that they could proceed to concluding the deal. The main character smiled weakly because of all those present. Only she knew that the mine was of no value. When the girl returned to her office, she summed up that she seemed to have sorted out the urgent matters, and now she was faced with the question of how to tell her adopted son about his stepmother's imminent marriage. One way to do this is to bring the protagonist to the estate and introduce him to Hugo, saying that this is his new dad, but that would be too unexpected. The second way was to ask for forgiveness for everything that happened, and say that although she had changed, it was probably hard for him to look her in the eyes, so she found him a better father, and in a year Hugo would not have to see her. This was an even more crazy idea than the first one, so the girl thought that now she was faced with a real dilemma. Although up to this point, everything had been going smoothly, but the girl understood that it was best to be honest and straightforward, so she invited her adopted son to her place. When the boy sat down next to her, he asked if he could try the sweets on the table, and the girl replied that she made it especially for him. When he was told that he could eat as much as he wanted, the hero of the novel began to eat chocolate cake with gusto. The blonde was glad that he liked it because she baked it so that Hugo wouldn't be so shocked when she told him about her marriage. At this moment, the main character noticed that the boy was covered in chocolate and wanted to help him remove it from his face. But when she extended her hand to him, she noticed how he closed his eyes and began to shake with fear, as if he was expecting a blow. She felt uncomfortable and apologized for trying to touch him without permission. Leila, trying to speak in as gentle a voice as possible, asked if he wanted her to wipe the crumbs from his face with a handkerchief. When she handed him the handkerchief, the boy noticed that it said, "Be happy, Hugo." The main character of the novel, who had previously been holding back his emotions, burst into tears, causing his stepmother to worry. The girl asked what happened, and the young man wondered out loud why she treated him so well. Hugo doesn't know that there is another person in this body, and the sudden changes frightened him, so he must have been enduring all this alone all this time. Leila apologized for the previous owner of the body, saying that after her husband's death, she was probably out of her mind from shock. She promised him again that she would never hate him again, and the boy bowed his head and asked if she was telling the truth. The main character picked him up in her arms and hugged him tightly, assuring him that her words were sincere. After the Viscount's son calmed down, he felt uncomfortable about his overreaction. The girl let him come to his senses, after which she said with a smile that she had news for him. When the boy made it clear that he was listening to her, the girl said that their family would soon be expanded, and Hugo asked for details. The blonde said that she decided to marry a man who would be a good father to him. She continued to say that he was very kind and would treat Hugo well, but if he didn't want a dad, he could just tell her straight out. The girl understood that he also needed time to think everything over. But, to her surprise, the hero decisively shook his head. With a trembling voice, the black-haired man replied that his mother takes care of him, and since she says so, it means that his new dad, unlike his real dad, will also take care of him. The heroine touched her adopted son's cheek and assured him that her new husband would sincerely take care of Hugo for his happiness. She added mentally that he would certainly not behave like the Viscount Marshal and his wife. Having decided that it was necessary to sort this out immediately, the girl suggested going and meeting her fiancé if Hugo didn't mind. The protagonist of the novel made it clear that he was not against it, and after preparation, they immediately headed to the duchy. The girl noticed that her adopted son was very nervous because his legs were shaking, but he tried to be brave, which was cute. When she stopped laughing, the main character looked out the window and noticed that they had arrived. Since the boy was very small, the blonde helped him get out of the carriage, and at that moment he noticed a man behind her. Hugo thought that although his mother thought his new father was a kind man, he himself could not believe that such behavior was an act of kindness, because the Duke's first words were that he wanted to be in his place. Finally, the acquaintance took place, and the young people began to eat in honor of their new family. The chairs were too high, making the boy uncomfortable, which he reported to his mother. The heroine smiled and patted her knee, inviting him to sit with her. The hero of the novel became embarrassed and lowered his head, saying that it was a violation of etiquette, which only provoked the blonde even more. She told her adopted son that he could do whatever he wanted, and then sat him on her lap. At that moment, she noticed that the men opposite were looking at them intently and asked what he was doing just now. The young man replied that she had imagined it, but Hugo did not miss his stern gaze. The precocious child noticed that he looked at him with a very scary look that made him shudder. Because of his insecurity, he thought that his new dad thought the boy was being rude. When he thought about how the Duke probably didn't like him, his mother noticed that there was something wrong with him, but the boy assured her that everything was fine. At this point, the future father of the novel's hero joined their conversation because he wanted to get to know Hugo better. The young man approached Leila and said that he wanted to get closer to her son because soon he would become his close friend too. The blonde was deeply touched by his words and expressed hope that they would all live in harmony. As soon as she finished speaking, the main character continued talking about how he wanted Hugo to sit on his lap, and the boy shuddered at his words. The man explained that this way they would be able to get along even faster. But even after that, the blonde hesitated. Then the black-haired man said that there was nothing to worry about, and he was sure that he could handle anything. The girl began to feel more convinced and turned to Hugo and asked his opinion on this issue. She said that this could be arranged if Hugo himself wanted it, and the hero looked hesitantly at his future father. This development of events scared the child a little, but he thought that the man in front of him was a kind person since his mother spoke about him like that. And he also noticed that his new dad really liked his mom, which couldn't help but make him happy. Nervously fiddling with his fingers, the boy replied that everything was fine and he didn't mind, mentally convincing himself that the man in front of him was a good person. As soon as the hero of the novel gave his consent, the Duke impatiently called him to him. The blonde noticed that her future husband was handling it deftly, so she asked if he had ever dealt with children before. The man smiled and replied that this had never happened before and that he was simply good at everything he did. When he finished his explanations, he turned to the boy and asked what he wanted to eat since he had already sat higher and could now see better. The hero noticed that the child was uncomfortable with him and said that he heard that he liked chocolate soufflé the most, after which he gave it to the boy. The girl liked that Lucius looked as if he was Hugo's real father. Moreover, she also noticed that they were somewhat similar, as if they were blood relatives. Deciding not to hide her thoughts, the blonde said that, in her opinion, they were like two peas in a pod. The black-haired young man asked if it could have been otherwise, and the girl laughed. Lucius asked Hugo what he liked more, chocolate pudding, or ice cream, and said that he would be allowed to eat as much as he wanted. The main character was glad that her future husband was able to win the favor of such a gentle child as Hugo. After their meal was finished, it could be seen that the black-haired boy was completely exhausted and fell asleep. The girl assumed that he had completely relaxed, which made him feel comfortable enough to fall asleep. The blonde asked if the Duke could ask to be put to bed, and the young man nodded. Hugo smiled and handed the child to a maid who stood nearby, ordering her to take him to the bedroom. Lucius looked at the girl again and suggested that they go for a walk while Hugo rested in the room. While they were walking, the young man asked what flowers his beloved liked. The blonde thought about it because she understood that the Duke was going to plant flowers in his garden as soon as she asked him. At that moment, something occurred to her and she asked if it was possible to put a swing in the garden. The man became curious, and the girl, noticeably nervous, said that there were some that she made herself. The young man immediately agreed, and the girl thanked him, saying that Hugo liked them very much. As soon as she said that the swing was not meant for her, but for Hugo, the black-haired man's good mood immediately evaporated. But the girl did not notice this, and with a bright smile once again showed how happy she was with his consent. The young man could not remain despondent for long when she showed him such a pure smile, and changing the subject, asked if she liked the garden. The blonde adjusted her hair, which was fluttering in the wind, and said that the garden was different from the one she had been in last time with Kazeta. This time, the main character could not hide his new intention to kill when he asked if the girl was alone with his subordinate. But even now the blonde didn't notice the catch, as she was surprised that he wasn't aware that she had ordered the white-haired man to walk with her. The young man was so angry that he couldn't hold back and summoned his rings as if he was going to kill someone. The girl asked in bewilderment why he had called them, and the man, having come to his senses, replied that he was probably nervous because she was next to him. The heroine also noticed that their hands often touched, although at first it seemed that they were far from each other. But now the girl felt that everything was going so well that it was even confusing. The man noticed her thoughtful expression and assumed that she was tired from them walking for so long. So I suggested taking a short break and resting in a secret place in the garden. The girl immediately understood what he was talking about, since this place was also mentioned in the original story. In the novel, Hugo worked hard to create the ring, but it was more difficult than he thought. Every time he failed, he went to that place holding back tears and then continued to practice again. The main character is delighted, thinking that this must be the very place, because it was considered secret in the Duke's garden. The girl hurried the young man, and he couldn't hold back his smile, seeing her impatience. When the main character saw this place in real life, she admired its beauty and asked who made it. The Duke smiled again and said that his mother had designed it, but the girl was no longer listening, thinking that this was where Hugo had once sat. The blonde looked carefully at the bench and realized that there was only one seat, and it would be a shame if she sat here alone. At that moment, the Duke unceremoniously sat down on the bench, although the girl thought that he wanted to invite her to sit down. When she told him about this, the man shook his head and patted his knees, suggesting that she sit here. The girl wanted to refuse, saying that she was no longer a child, but the man had already extended his hand to her and presented her with a fait accompli. The man touched her neck with his hand and said with a smile that she was very lucky to have him. Since the girl was confused, she did not immediately notice how he attached the necklace to her. The man pressed himself against her chest and explained that it was a wedding gift to make her feel even more beautiful. The girl couldn't understand how he inserted the ring into the client, but when she was asked if she liked it, she nodded her head without hesitation. At that moment, she jumped up from her seat and asked if the Duke remembered that he had promised to teach her how to summon the ring. The man smiled again and replied that all he thought about was their conversations. The main character couldn't believe that he could say such things without blinking an eye. The blonde asked what color the ring would be if she could create it, and the man replied that he didn't know, expressing the hope that it would be the same color as his. The girl no longer paid attention to his provocative words and asked him to teach her how to create rings today. Of course, this time the man did not refuse her and said that they would do it as much as she wanted. When they arrived at his office, the man admitted that he had never taught anyone before, and so he didn't know how he would do. The blonde assured him that there was nothing to worry about, and if she didn't succeed, it meant that she was a bad student. But such words did not please the Duke, who turned in her direction. He started talking about how he couldn't let her be a bad student, so he would try his best, for which he gave her a second gift from him. Holding the weapon in her hands, the girl thought that she had been given a lot of gifts today, so next time she would have to make him cookies. When they sat down on the sofa, the man said that he had known how to use the ring since birth. Therefore, Kizette would have been more suitable for the role of mentor in this matter, but the Duke did not like this idea. The blonde couldn't understand why he didn't like it when she saw the knights. But the man didn't give her time to ask as he began teaching her how a gun's sight worked. He indicated the mark to which the ring should reach, and the girl could not believe that everything was so simple. The man suggested that she try, since she would have to learn it herself, but the girl replied that she did not know how to summon the ring. The main character leaned on his hand and suggested that she just shoot for now, in case she felt something at that moment. The girl remembered that in the original, Hugo was helped by knights and was able to create the ring only 8 years later. So she wondered if she could do it, but decided that she should at least try anyway. The heroine fired, and to the shock of the girl and the Duke, she succeeded the first time. For the girl, it was some kind of nonsense, because how could it be so simple for such an ordinary person like her? The next day, while the girl was writing a letter, she thought that everything was going so well that it was stressful. The story progresses very differently from the book, but everything goes too smoothly, and she even managed to create a ring, and it was like the calm before the storm. At that moment, a maid named Jane burst into the girl's room, and the girl asked what had happened to her. Jane wanted to warn the blonde that His Majesty the Emperor had arrived, but she was rudely pushed out of the way. The one who treated the woman so rudely was a handsome blonde man who said that he had come to take Leila away from here. Although the main character was at a loss at first, she quickly came to her senses and greeted the son of the Empire as required by etiquette. The man smiled condescendingly and said that this greeting was very boring. The blonde looked at the girl again and, touching her face, said that she reminded him of his cat, which ran away a couple of years ago. The man muttered that he would deal with his escaped cat later, and the girl couldn't understand what she was talking about. He spoke as if the main character was the cat that escaped, so she assumed he knew Leila from the original novel. Enrique was the ruler of the empire and also the villain in the novel. He was one of the shadows that made a deal with the cursed ring and always got in the way of Lucius and Hugo. Although the girl noticed that in the novel there was no mention of Leila and Enrique knowing each other, while she was thinking about this, the young man pulled her towards him and admitted that she had become much prettier since they had last seen each other. The girl asked in bewilderment what he was talking about, but the blonde ignored her and silently picked her up in his arms. The main character was horrified and, trying to speak calmly, asked to put her back. The emperor replied that it would be difficult since he had not come to kindly take her away like a gentleman. He continued to reveal his intentions by saying that he had come to kidnap her. Thus, the girl had no choice but to follow the young man. The girl understood that although she didn't know the whole situation, she shouldn't have gotten involved in it and needed to find out what kind of relationship she had with Leila in the novel. Considering that he said that she ran away, apparently they were connected by more than just friendship. The man smiled and offered her tea, which he knew was her favorite, and the girl decided first of all to pretend that she didn't know Enrique. The girl thanked him for his kindness, but replied that she did not like flower tea and that it was not at all to her taste, and these words made the man nod thoughtfully. When she showed him that she was not going to be polite, the man reached his hand to her face and asked her to look at something. The man touched her chin with his fingertips and formed a black ring on his palm. And just as the girl began to wonder why he showed it to her, the man grinned and threw the rings in her direction. As soon as the ring was directed towards her, it began to spin in her hand, and then slowly began to dissipate. The atmosphere around the emperor became even more oppressive, and he commented that, as expected, the girl knew that he could use the ring. The distorted ring follows the pure ring, and he showed it to her on purpose, which means that in the novel, Leila could also use the ring. This meant that the emperor was using Leila to cleanse his corrupted rings. In the novel, it was said that although Enrique had little right to the throne, at some point, thanks to the power of the ring, he received enormous support and was able to become emperor. The girl kept wondering how he made people believe that he was using a pure ring, and now everything makes sense if he used Leila. The blonde couldn't believe that Leila was also chosen by the ring, because in the novel it was said that the ring rarely chose someone. Most likely, Enrique found out about this and took advantage of it to become the ruler, but the heroine did not want to be used by him. So she quickly married the Viscount Marshal. Even the ruler could not ignore the fact that she had a husband and just come to her. The one who stood in his way died suddenly, so he so boldly kidnapped her. The young man did not pay attention to her thoughtfulness and asked her to look at his hand. When the girl looked down, she saw that the ring in her hand had cleared and turned a faint sand color. The emperor smiled and said that it seemed the girl's ring still remembered him. The blonde noticed from the expression on his face that he was losing patience, as he must have not seen a cleaned ring for a long time. If this continues, he will not let her go, so the girl said that it was time for her to go back. At that moment, the man suddenly jumped up from his seat and grabbed the girl by the wrist, saying that he had not finished speaking yet. The blonde raised one eyebrow and asked if she had lost all her manners while she was a stray cat. The girl did not get angry when he insulted her and simply replied that she was not His Majesty's pet. This time the man decided not to be so pushy and, admitting his mistake, let her go. But he immediately added that even though she wasn't his cat, he couldn't let her go. The man didn't know if she was using Duke Jupert to escape or if she had some other plan, but in his opinion, it wouldn't work. He told her that the Duke was famous for his indifference to women and could not love her, which meant that she had probably proposed a fictitious marriage to him in order to marry again. When she flinched, the man took her hand and said that the only one who truly loved her was himself. The main character understood perfectly well that he was just trying to use the power of the ring with her help. She couldn't understand why they always told her about love, even though they didn't show it. The girl remembered how even her father justified himself by saying that he loved her and asked if there was another person who would take care of her more than he did. The blonde closed her eyes and wondered if she was destined to suffer from people who wanted to use her for the rest of her days. When she closed her eyes, another male image from her memories appeared before her. This man thanked her for her help, but asked her not to do it again, because for some reason he didn't want her to get hurt. He was also the one who promised her that when they got married they would become family to each other. At that moment, the girl realized that there were people in this world who sincerely cared about her, and the blonde's words were just a cunning manipulation. The blonde pushed away His Majesty's hand and, asking for forgiveness, said that she could not agree with him. The blonde couldn't believe that the girl in front of him had decided to rebel against him, but ignoring his reaction, Leila stood up. With a serious expression on her face, the main character said that she already has a man who loves her. And it was none other than Duke Jupert, who showed himself only from the best side during their short acquaintance. After her words, the girl decided to take her leave, asking for forgiveness for her rudeness. The man sighed heavily, and closing his eyes for a second, suggested that they forget their recent conversation. The blonde looked at her again and said that he would give her what she had been asking for all this time, so in return he asked her to stop sulking at him. At that moment, the girl realized that he still did not want to take her words seriously. Therefore, looking coldly at him, the girl said that she had no reason or the slightest desire to accept anything from His Majesty. After he heard her words, the man grinned because he still didn't believe what was happening. He wanted to ask if she was sure of her judgment, but he was interrupted by a noise outside the door. The emperor wondered what was going on there because he heard the knight shouting at someone and saying that they couldn't enter without an invitation. The one who so unceremoniously showed up in the emperor's office was Duke Jupert. The blonde, to put it mildly, was shocked because she did not understand how Lucius knew that she was here. A black-haired young man approached the girl and asked what she was doing there while he was looking for her everywhere. The girl looked at the emperor and realized that this was her chance to show him that she had a deep connection with the duke. The main character took the initiative for the first time and, hugging Lucius's hand, replied that she was just about to return to him. For some reason, her words only made the young man even more worried as he suspected something was wrong with her behavior. It was at this moment that the emperor called out to the duke and asked if he was invisible in his eyes. Lucius looked straight at him and with an apathetic expression asked if he had been here from the beginning. The blond man, who crossed his arms over his chest upon his appearance, commented that it was very rude of such a high-ranking nobleman. The protagonist refuted his words by asking whether His Majesty had the right to point out his rudeness after he had taken away the girl who would soon become his wife. His face darkened even more, and he warned the emperor that he could not destroy with his own hands the bond between the imperial family and his lineage that had been passed down from generation to generation. The young man said that if something like this happened again, they would speak differently, and these words made the emperor shudder. The man found himself at a disadvantage and could only watch in silence as his enemy took away his potential assistant. After this, the young people could be seen in a carriage heading back to the estate. At that moment, the girl remembered her conversation with the emperor and wondered what kind of thing Madame Marshall wanted to receive. She was sure that this could become a problem for her in the future, and just wanted to find a solution to this problem when she was distracted. It was the Duke who touched her cheek, explaining that he had noticed some speck of dust there. The girl touched the place, thinking that the shadow ring was still there. Taking advantage of her confusion, the Duke moved closer and asked what she had spoken about with His Majesty the Emperor. The blonde replied that she didn't understand what he was talking about, and the man advised that the next time he bothered her, she should just shoot her, and Lucius would take care of the rest personally. The girl became curious why he was going through all this trouble for her. When she asked this question, the young man blushed and said that he was doing this because she would soon become his wife. The heroine couldn't help but doubt, because they were a couple only by contract and only for a year, but in the brunette's opinion, they were still a couple. The young man promised Leila that he would love her as his real wife until the contract expired. After his words, the girl blushed, and to hide it, she turned away. To change the subject, the girl asked how he knew she was in the imperial palace, and the man explained that he came to the mansion because he felt an unpleasant clot of energy next to her. The main character realized that Lucius's ring reacted to the damaged ring, and the Duke realized everything. The young man went on to say that her maid had told him what had happened, and he thought he had looked rather impressive breaking into the palace to rescue her. Suddenly he lost his playfulness, and with a serious expression told Enrique that the shadow he had been looking for so long was right in front of him. In the original story, Lucius discovered the identity of the shadow without any results, and was forced to stop investigating. And this happened because of a deal made between the imperial family and the Jupert clan a long time ago. Instead of removing the Juperts as a potential threat, the imperial family decided to cooperate, and thanks to this, the empire gained great power. Since Hugo had gotten rid of all the members of the current ruling family anyway, no one knew that the imperial family had paid Jupert for the deal. If Lucius had not been able to touch the emperor, they would have paid a huge price, and the hero certainly knew this. Some time passed, and the young people reached the main character's mansion, and when leaving, the girl thanked the Duke for his help today. The young man smiled and assured her that she didn't have to thank him, since they were a couple after all. This time, the Viscountess was not embarrassed and said that, on the contrary, such words are even more important in the relationship of spouses, and called him by name. When the main character heard her words, he jerked his whole body and grabbed his chest, which made the blonde worry about him. When she anxiously asked if he had been injured yesterday, Volos shook his head and explained that his heart beat faster when her lips spoke his name. Now the girl who promised herself not to give in to his provocations failed and blushed with embarrassment. At the same time in the palace, the emperor sat thoughtfully in his office after the young people had left it. He thought the contract marriage was a cover, but it seemed the Duke was genuinely infatuated with the blonde. The young man grinned, deciding that something was just great, and with Leila's help, he could achieve even more. The next day, the girl decided to bake cookies for Lucius to thank him for saving her from Enrique. She was almost finished, and now she needed to shape it. And she remembered that she had asked to borrow a baking pan from Jane, but she only had heart-shaped ones. The main character expressed hope that Lucius would not attach much importance to this and continued cooking. Finally, everything was ready, and the girl arrived at the duchy, where she was met by guards who did not know that she was coming. The blonde explained that it was a surprise for Lucius, so she asked him not to tell him that she was here, and the men obediently nodded. As she headed to the mansion, the girl decided that since she had come, she needed to look at the training ground and maybe share some cookies with the knights. The girl noticed a familiar knight who greeted her from afar, to which the girl also waved her hand with a smile. At that moment, his commander-in-chief approached the man and slapped him on the back of the head, asking why he was shirking his training. As she was scolding the knight, the girl noticed Lady Leila and asked what brought her here. The blonde smiled and explained that she had baked cookies and wanted to share them with everyone. The main character politely asked if the girl with red hair wanted to try her cookies, and she nodded vigorously. The man who was watching this asked her why she was so happy about such a small thing, and she said that she loves everything that has a sweet taste. Then she shared that their lord does not have a sweet tooth, so she rarely gets the chance to try something like that. The girl couldn't even imagine that the Duke didn't like sweets. The young men saw her shocked expression and explained that the black-haired man simply hated everything sweet, and the girl thought for some time what to do. Deciding to surrender this time, the girl handed the basket of cookies to the knights. She felt bad about deceiving them, but she still said that it was a gift for everyone and asked them to share it with the other knights. She decided that nothing could be done about it and that she would have to prepare something else. Some time passed, and now Lucius headed to the training ground. He didn't even realize that Leila was here because he was busy with emergency matters, so he immediately started asking his knight about it. When he asked if Leila was here, the young man replied that the lady had come recently, but had already left, and the black-haired man was angry that he was not aware of it. At that moment, a girl with red hair approached them and greeted her master holding a basket of cookies in her hands. She began to praise their future owner with an enthusiastic expression on her face, commenting on how incredible it was that she had prepared such cookies. The girl said that our food was so delicious that everyone wanted to try it, and didn't even notice the reaction she had on the Duke. But she soon quickly realized her mistake when she heard the young man's sinister laughter at her words. With a grim smile, the man suggested that they must be full of energy now, so they could extend their training until next week. The young people could do nothing and began to carry out his instructions without any complaints. As soon as they had moved a sufficient distance away from the Duke, the knight began to be indignant, saying how the girl could be so tactless. At the same time, Lucius was thinking that he couldn't even imagine that he could get so angry because of some cookies, and decided to figure out how to save his relationship with Leila, because he didn't think that he could let her go after a year. When the girl came back, the first thing she did was give Hugo a taste of her cookies. While the girl was thinking about how the boy had gained a lot of weight, and because of that, he looked even cuter, the one she was thinking about called out to her. With his head bowed, the black-haired boy said that Jane had read him a story a couple of days ago about a witch. The maid told him that witches fatten up small children and then eat them, and the blonde commented that this couldn't be. At that moment, the girl realized that the main character thought that she was planning to eat him soon and asked about it, to which the boy replied that he did not think so. But the girl did not believe him and assured him that she did not have the courage to eat such a lovely and sweet child like him. The child sighed heavily and admitted that he wouldn't be so cute if he gained weight. The main character disagreed with him and declared that he was sweet because he was attentive and knew how to appreciate the little things. And in the future, he will be even better because he will fight evil and become very brave. The girl from her past life was a faithful reader of this novel and really wanted to tell this to the hero. In the novel, Hugo was very worried about his changing appearance, and the girl promised herself that she would not allow this to happen again. While she was thinking about this, the main character of the novel called out to her and with a determined look said that he wanted to protect her. But he quickly lost his confidence and, shaking with embarrassment, continued to talk about how his mother had suddenly changed because she had previously been sad about his father's death. And now the boy wanted to make sure that she would no longer feel bad. The child, looking straight into his mother's eyes, promised to protect her with all his might. This statement made the main character's heart beat faster and tears came to her eyes, but she forced a smile. The next day, while in her office, the girl decided for herself that she would also protect him so that he would not suffer this time. And to do this, she needed to sort out the things that were right under her nose. She thought that first she needed to come up with a plan to change the head of the Hiln. Leila wanted to continue her thoughts, but she was interrupted by the vibration of Lucius's ring, which meant that he had come to the palace. At that moment the door opened and she was greeted by the Duke, who was also her future husband. After a moment of surprise, the girl invited the young man to sit down, and in return he presented her with a small gift, which was placed on the table. The girl was surprised to find sweets there and asked why the Duke had brought them here. The young man looked at her with a serene gaze and explained that it was gratitude for her sharing the cookies with his knights. With an awkward expression on her face, the main character thanked him for his consideration. The man didn't stop there and asked why she left without greeting him, and the girl was momentarily confused. The young man made a sad expression and said that he felt very lonely because of this. The girl thought about how she hadn't given him cookies because she had heard that he didn't like them, and had come here because she thought she might disturb him with her visit. While she looked at him with a questioning expression on her face, the man continued to say that she couldn't even imagine how happy he was when he felt the energy of the ring inside the estate. When he mentioned this, the girl unconsciously touched the pendant on her neck. So when he realized that she was in the estate, he wanted to go see her, but she had already left without even seeing him. The man sighed heavily and said that Rutger had laughed at him because he was the only one who had not tasted her cookies. The blonde began to get nervous and explained that she had been told about his hatred of sweets, but the man, turning away, began to deny it. The girl realized that she wouldn't get anything out of him and asked for forgiveness, saying that she thought he wouldn't like the cookies, so she just left. Deciding to take advantage of the situation, the young man, without changing his expression, asked to be hugged as an apology. The girl immediately rejected this, saying that he could ask about it the next time she made a mistake, because she didn't know about it. Since she knew she needed to change the subject, Leila revealed that she had sold the pass to make someone the head of Hiln. This had the opposite effect, because the young man became gloomy and asked why she started talking about work again. The girl replied that there was nothing to be done, and that they needed to return his mine and asked if he was upset again, which made him wince. At first he felt hurt that she didn't even understand his feelings, but he decided to be honest and admit that he was really upset. But what shocked the girl most was that he said that he didn't even know why he was so upset. Blushing, the girl continues to talk about how they sold the Marshall family's right-of-way to the Nixon family, on condition that the Duke gives her the mine that produces the magic stone that the Knights of Jupert had recently been looking for. The Duke asked again if she had really sold the right-of-way and that coal mine. Leila said that the woman was fine with everything because the blonde didn't bother to explain to her that the mine was extracting coal, although this was stated in the contract, but she didn't even read it. The man was amused by her intelligence and admitted that everything seemed much simpler when his partner was with him, so he did not want to part with her. The girl thought that he was saying this because he wanted her to continue helping him, and then, unlike in the original story, this could play into her hands. But the heroine realized that there was a discrepancy here because then he didn't need to be sad about the mention of work. While she was thinking, the dark-haired man announced that in that case he would have to hand over the mine to the heroine, and the girl quickly nodded. After her positive answer, the young man stood up from his seat and hung over the girl. The man said that he would give her the mine and asked what he would get in return, and the girl began to behave strangely, and she herself could not understand the reason for this. She noticed that she was again beginning to experience unidentified feelings for Lucius. For a moment, she considered the possibility that her contract husband had romantic feelings for her, but quickly pushed the thought away. She reminded herself that Lucius was simply acting in accordance with their agreement, because in the original he had absolutely no interest in women. So, in her opinion, it is better to discard stupid thoughts and be content with what you have. So the girl forced a watery smile and promised to bake new cookies and not give them to anyone else this time. The man, who was quite sensitive to other people's emotions, noticed her hesitation, but decided that it was too early to focus on it, and simply nodded his head with a smile. Some time passed from that moment, and the girl came to the duchy again to fulfill her promise. As she passed by the training center, a familiar knight noticed her and greeted her. The blonde also smiled at him and asked where the Duke was, telling him that she was going to practice ring creation with him and had also prepared some sweets for him. The young man replied that the Duke was now with Roxana, and they had gone to search the place where they had found the hole. After his words, the girl froze in her place, because according to the plot of the novel, the search stopped as soon as it became clear that the shadow was Enrique. She realized that Lucius had changed his mind, and Leila became tense because the more the story differed from the original, the more useless the information she had would be. At this point, the Duke, who had no interest in women, was showing her unprecedented generosity. However, if the value of the information she can provide falls, the girl will no longer be of interest to Lucius. The main character understood that this was natural, but she wondered why her soul felt so uneasy about it. At that moment, although her thoughts were disturbed as the knight next to her asked if something was wrong, the girl smiled again. She assured him that nothing serious had happened and suggested that they practice wielding the ring together since Lucius was gone. Rutger immediately agreed and boasted that he was an excellent teacher of people, and that he even taught Kizette, to which the one he was talking about sighed heavily. The man with gray hair muttered that the other knight had not even given him instructions, and Rutger asked if he had forgotten about the time they had spent together. His words began to irritate the Kizette, and he fired his pistol at him, but the other man managed to fight back, keeping a confident smile on his face. Rutger pointed the gun upwards and commented that the other knight was always very predictable and shot the ring straight every time. While they were arguing, the girl looked at it with a cheerful smile, as she found their interaction very funny. Rutger turned his attention back to the blonde and explained that if she released the ring in this way, she would be able to neutralize the enemy's ring. The young man suggested that she try to do this, and the girl thought that she wanted to quickly master its creation, rather than learn how to direct it. The knight noticed the girl's uncertainty and offered to make a bet if she would find it more interesting. He pointed his finger at the man with gray hair and offered to compete with the Hesida, who was the pride of the Knights of Jupert. When he said that the loser would have to fulfill the winner's wish, the girl thought it would be fun and agreed. The girl thought that if she won, she could ask them to teach Hugo how to handle the ring, and the man with gray hair replied that he liked the idea too. The young man condescendingly leaned towards the girl and said that he would even close his eyes to make it easier for her. Despite the slightly tense atmosphere, Rutger smiled, wondering what the outcome of the match would be. The man released 3 rings of air and said that the rules were simple, and that even a beginner like Leila could handle the task. He released the rings in a straight line and explained that the winner would be the one who caught the most rings out of the 3, flying in a circle. The young people began searching, and the girl understood that she needed to be not only accurate, but that Kizette had an advantage over her, because he knows how to use the rings, and he also knows the court better than her. So it turned out that she was already at a disadvantage, because she lagged behind her rival in many things. But that didn't mean she had to give up, she just had to try harder. While the girl was focused on her task, she noticed an abandoned warehouse. Although the main character didn't think that the ring would be hidden in such a place, she decided to look into it anyway to make sure. It was strange to her that there was nothing at all in the room, and everything looked so abandoned that dust had formed around. The girl felt uncomfortable, but continued to walk forward as if some force was pulling her to this place. At that moment, the girl noticed that something sparkled next to one of the boxes and immediately realized that it was a ring. Leila, without thinking, pulled out her pistol and pointed it at the ring, after which she fired. Just when she thought it was over, the girl noticed a hole and reached out a trembling hand towards it, wondering why she was inside this training ground. The blonde immediately assumed that it was a spy, although the original did not mention that the spy was a shadow, so the girl became scared. This probably meant that the spy's master was a shadow, and the girl intended to tell Lucius about it as soon as he returned. When she touched it, the ring began to dissipate and disappear from her sight. The blonde became curious about where it was heading, and thought that perhaps the Rutger ring was nearby and it was reaching out to it. All this time, the girl was chasing after him, and finally her expectations were justified, and it led her to the knight's ring. The girl found it funny that the ring was so stupid that it was hidden among the leaves. But that didn't stop her from shooting him, and then smilingly telling herself that now she only needed to find one ring. In her moment of jubilation, she didn't even notice how her fiancé snuck up on her and grabbed her around the waist. When the young man asked what she was doing there, the girl looked at him in surprise and, without answering, asked when he had arrived. The young man said that he had just returned, explaining that some kind of disgusting energy was emanating from her aura, and the girl realized that he had felt that she had touched the damaged ring and turned in that direction. The girl explained that there was a black ring in that warehouse, and she thought that a spy was at work there, and the young man replied that she was right. The man asked her not to touch him so thoughtlessly next time, and the girl obediently nodded, making it clear that she understood the danger of the situation. The blonde assumed that this was not what he was worried about, and decided to distract his attention by telling him that she had made a bet with Kizé. The Duke asked for details, and the girl explained that the winner would be the one who found the most Rutger rings. The man believed that he needed to help her win and pointed out where the ring was. To the girl, it sounded like a lie, but she understood that she couldn't just ignore his words. Unsuspectingly, the main character asked what kind of place it was, and the young man said that it was an underground warehouse. The man held the girl's hand so that she wouldn't get hurt while they walked in the dark, and told her that this is where they kept their family's heirlooms. Leila asked if she could take a look at them, and the man nodded with a smile, commenting that they would soon become a family anyway. The blonde didn't know if it was okay to show her family religion like that, and asked to find a Rutgers ring for her first. The young man pointed out that the ring was right there, saying that it was unlikely that the Kizet would be here anytime soon, so he could show her the family heirloom first. When the girl nodded, the young man smiled and opened the door to the room where only family members could enter. He said that from generation to generation in the Jupert family, such a thing as a prisoner was passed down. Everyone thinks that the imperial family gave the Jupert family a treasure, but in fact it was a magic tool. All the rings of the Juperts of previous generations were enclosed in this place. After the founding of the empire, the imperial family feared the ring of the Jupert family. They created a squad of Knights of the Rings by gathering ordinary people who rarely dealt with the ring. But all these goals were useless against even one Jupert, so they failed in following this plan. Therefore, the imperial family imposed certain restrictions on the Jupert family to restrain their boundless power. Since the ring of Jupert is imprisoned, if the Duke desires the power of the imperial family, a curse will fall on the blood of the Juperts. But the young man declared that he had not locked his ring in that place, so he still possessed that ability. The blonde felt uneasy and asked anxiously if everything would be okay, and the young man replied that they had tried to resist him, but even the Emperor was stunned by his strength. In the original, when Hugo became Emperor, nothing happened, and she assumed it was because he didn't have any Jupert blood in his veins. The main character now suggested going for Yutger's ring, and the man asked if she would play with him if she caught it. But unlike what he expected, the girl replied that she didn't think she could do it. The main character said that tomorrow she and Hugo are going on a picnic, so she needs to prepare a lot of things. The young man, without thinking twice, asked permission to join them since he had helped her find the ring. At first, the blonde thought that she had heard him poorly, since she had not expected at all that he would want to go with them. But a second later, she agreed when she realized that this was a great opportunity for the two of them to get to know each other better. The young man smiled and admitted that he was so excited that he would hardly sleep that day. At that moment, the man realized that since she had already found 2 rings, it meant she had won. So he asked what the prize was for her. The blonde said that they were betting on the fulfillment of one wish, and when the man asked if the knight with gray hair could fulfill her wish, the girl smiled and assured that there was nothing to worry about. The main character shared with her future husband that she wanted something from the Hyzet from their very first meeting, and after her words, Lucius tensed up. The next day, as promised, the young people went on a picnic, and the youngest of them admired the view. The blonde looked at her adopted son and asked if he liked everything, to which he nodded enthusiastically and said that it was his first time in such a place. At this point, Lucius intervened in their conversation and said that he had rented them a boat. Hugo was even more delighted by this statement, as it would be his first time riding a boat. The girl decided to support his enthusiasm and suggested swimming together. As they set off, the blonde worriedly asked the boy if he was scared, and he replied that he was not scared at all, adding that the sunlight reflecting off the water was very beautiful. Leila was glad to hear that Hugo was not afraid of water and decided that they should come here more often. While she was thinking about this, the boy who was staring at the water felt some strange sensation. The water seemed to be drawing him towards itself, and the child did not even notice how he began to feel sleepy and his eyes began to close. But the girl noticed this and excitedly called out to her adopted son as he fell into the water. The Duke was faster and, thanks to his agility, managed to catch the boy before he fell. The man asked him not to stick his head out so much, and the black-haired man apologized and explained that there was something swimming in the lake, and he just wanted to catch it. The girl carefully took his small hands in hers and commented with concern that it was very dangerous and he could fall. With each passing minute, the boy felt worse, and he hesitated again and asked for forgiveness, even though it was hard for him. Finally, fatigue took its toll and he fainted, but his stepmother managed to catch the hero. She held the boy's unconscious body close to her and asked Lucius what had happened to him. Unlike her, the Duke was extremely collected, and also touching the boy, replied that he did not know. The young man suggested returning to land and showing the child to the doctor, and the blonde agreed with him. The girl picked up the child in her arms as gently as possible, and the Duke helped her carry him. After that, they left, not even realizing that it was the lake they had just visited. When the doctor checked the condition of the Viscount's son, he determined that he was simply scared since there were no external injuries. And the girl asked with concern why he didn't wake up then. And the brunette replied that he would get up soon, but was just fast asleep at the moment. The man sweated and wiped himself with a napkin and continued to say that although this was just his humble opinion, perhaps the problem was inside Hugo's body. Soon the cause of his nervous state was discovered, and it was the Duke who was looking at him intently. The man realized that the doctor would be of little use and allowed him to leave, and he bowed before leaving. As soon as he moved away, the blonde told the Duke that she did not understand what was happening when Hugo looked as if he was possessed by something. The young man looked at the girl and suggested that they just wait, because the doctor said that he would wake up soon. The young man also presented her with a letter, explaining that this message was addressed to her, and the man was waiting for the right moment to give it to her. The blonde thanked him, mentally adding how glad she was that Lucius took care of this while she was very busy. Deciding to end it immediately, the girl opened the letter and what she read shocked her. It was the same anonymous letter as the one addressed to Mrs. Marshall, and it said that the Duke was not as bad as the last one, but still not up to her level, and it was a waste of time, so she had better not die. The girl wondered who was sending these letters, assuming that they were close to Lady Marshall. And as soon as she thought about it, the man next to her asked if it was bad news. The blonde quickly replied that this was not the case, and the Duke asked why she was hiding the letter then. The main character replied that there really was nothing important in it, and suggested that he take a look at the contents. The young man said that he was not initially interested in it, considering that she was hiding it. He became curious. The girl handed him the letter, expressing the hope that he would not get angry after reading it. But unlike her expectations, the man laughed and commented that although he didn't know who it was, he hit the nail on the head. He couldn't even believe it, but he realized how inferior he was to his future wife. The blonde asked if the Duke was offended by the words written in this letter. The young man replied that he couldn't wait to announce the date of their wedding, and what a wonderful wife he had. The main character felt uncomfortable and hid her face from him, commenting that his words were nonsense. She thought that Lucius seemed to be positive about their engagement, and maybe they would even continue their marriage after a year. At that moment, her positive thoughts were interrupted by a rustling sound coming from not far from her and a boy's mooing. The girl felt even better when she realized that her adopted son had woken up. When the child opened his eyes and noticed his stepmother, he convulsively raised his body. He curled up into a ball and began to tremble with fear, constantly asking for forgiveness and saying that he was wrong. This became a turning point for the girl, who realized that something was definitely wrong with her son, and they returned to their original relationship. The Duke, who had been silently analyzing the situation until then, noticed that his beloved had frozen in place. So I tried to help her and approached Hugo and gently put my hand on his shoulder. When the young man called out to Hugo, the child shuddered in fear and looked at him with horror. Even the always cool-headed Duke felt uneasy under his gaze, and he asked if the boy recognized him. And so the child, with a trembling voice, asked who he was, which made the girl even more horrified. Some time passed, and now the young people were sitting on the sofa, and an awkward silence arose between them. The girl remembered her recent conversation with the doctor, who announced that Hugo had temporary memory loss due to severe shock. The young man assured her that there was nothing to worry about, and that they would be back soon, and the girl muttered that only recent memories had disappeared. The Duke also felt sad when he saw her reaction, and he tried to calm her down by suggesting to wait a little longer and everything would be fine. The heroine did not listen to him, and thought that she had not seen Hugo like this for a long time, and had managed to forget what irreparable harm Leila Marshall had done to him. She thought that everything could be easily solved, but thanks to him she again realized her helplessness. She decided for herself that after the marriage contract ended it was her duty to leave. She understood that she had to be always prepared for parting with Lucius, and that all this would not last long. The girl clenched her hand into a fist and ordered herself to pull herself together and not give her heart to the Duke. A few days later, as the doctor said, Hugo's memory returned, although he had no memory of losing it. But it still bothered the girl, who couldn't help but sigh heavily. A girl with red hair sat opposite her and asked if something was bothering her. They were not yet close enough to call each other by their first names, so the girl called her Mrs. Marshall. The blonde smiled and said that she could just call her Leila, asking what the point of these ridiculous addresses was. The lady did not lose her head and asked again why Leila was sighing so heavily, since it was the first time she had seen such a sad face on the newlywed. The main character began to deny her assumptions that something had happened to her, but the red-haired girl did not believe her. They said that sharing experiences would make it easier, so the girl asked if the blonde had quarreled with Duke Juper, and this made Leila's eyes widen in surprise. She wondered in her mind if she had such a persistent character in the original, or if she was just kind to her loved ones. Noticing her intent gaze, the lady added that of course she knew that the Duke would do anything for her, but she was still interested. The girl thought that spouses do not always quarrel, especially since this contract is only for a year, a completely businesslike relationship. The blonde said that the problem was not with the Duke, but with her son, since he had been ill a few days ago. The other side had already forgotten that she had a son and said that the child's illness was making her worry too. The main character smiled and thanked her for empathizing with her and understanding what she felt. Having become serious, the girl suggested returning to the main topic by showing her the documents that outlined her plans for the future. She got nervous and asked where they would start, and the blonde replied that they needed to start with the most important thing, because within Hiln, they needed to take major personnel measures. The lady misunderstood her, saying that Hilna was a conservative place, and the resistance would be very strong. However, in Leila's opinion, this was possible, and by pulling this off, the red-haired woman would be able to strengthen her position in the family. She handed her one document, asking to look at the information about the related union that was supporting Dawson Hiln. Sinea took it in her hands and after reading it asked where such details came from, since some information is top secret. Without knowledge of the novel, the heroine would not have coped, and due to repeated readings, everything fit into her head and, of course, additional investigations were not possible. The lady asked with a confident smile if Leila would need any help. The blonde replied that there was one person who puzzled her. The daughter of the Hilon family was about to find out whoever it was, but the girl did not listen to her and thought about how surprised she was when she first heard the story of this man. She thought he was just a suspicious person, but she couldn't even imagine his connection with the Hiln family. The girl brought the article to Blue and pointed at Baron Blake, asking what his connection was with Dawson, but the other side did not understand her. The blonde heard that he was Dawson's closest person, but the girl did not immediately remember him, which meant that he was kept away from the family. The heroine continued to talk about how the lady had recently been to a party at Hyun's, but she did not remember anyone coming up to greet her. It seemed that the blonde would not be able to gather enough information at the moment and decided to pay more attention to the Baron. The investigation revealed that Blake was in good standing with Dawson, the prominent heir to the Hyun family, and communicating with a nobleman from a little-known family without any reason seems unlikely, so they must have some business in common. Although it is impossible to say exactly what the essence of the deal is, the girl decided to see if they could use this information to their advantage. At this time, the red-haired woman asked if Baron Blake was a significant figure, adding that she suddenly remembered something. He was known as a very polite and friendly person, and often attended social events. But at a recent party, he behaved very rudely and created a lot of awkwardness, which the blonde noticed. This statement greatly surprised the lady, and she said that it was not at all like him. When she asked for certain that Leila had not been mistaken about him, the blonde became lost in thought. It definitely had the Blake family crest on it, and the face was the same as the portrait. She suggested that maybe she should find out more about him since even though they had focused on Dawson and the Baron's relationship, they only had scraps of information. For some reason, the girl became fixated on everything connected with him from the moment she first saw him, because he seemed so familiar to her. The girl wondered what the man was hiding, and this made her feel uneasy. The lady opposite her noticed Leila's condition and promised to find out what kind of relationship there was between Dawson and the Baron. When the blonde expressed doubts about this, the girl assured her that she could rely on her ability to obtain information. The girl decided to trust her and said that she needed to know what Baron Blake and Dawson Ahiln were up to in the near future. The redhead was simply filled with enthusiasm, and with a determined look said that she would find out everything without attracting attention. This behavior made the main character laugh, and it was able to relieve the tension that was hovering around her. The girl tried to find out what kind of relationship they had and to determine a plan of action for the future, but she didn't think that everything was so secretive. She decided that she needed to finish her work quickly and go to Hugo and Lucius. When she entered the room, Jane greeted her, and after that the blonde asked how Hugo was doing. The head maid made a sad face and said that the child was in his room. The blonde immediately suspected something was wrong and asked if everything was okay. Jane first noticed and then told that the young gentleman did not eat anything and did not leave his room. The girl added to herself that history was repeating itself again and that this made her feel sick again. The girl called out to her maid and said that she would immediately go get desserts for the child. When the girl took the basket of sweets with her and headed to her son's room, she suddenly realized something. The blonde wondered if the boy would become too attached to her since it would leave him anyway. The girl complained about the injustice, namely why such terrible consequences occurred, although it was not her personality that tormented Hugo, but Madame Marshall. Tears came to her eyes and she forced them to stop, reassuring herself with the thought that Hugo didn't know about this anyway, and that to him she was just a tyrant. One way or another, until her last day here, she wanted to leave him only good memories, so she got herself in order. The blonde plucked up her courage and knocked on Hugo's door, asking permission to enter. When the boy made it clear that he was not sleeping, the girl entered the room and found him lying in bed. She forced a smile and invited the boy to eat the cookies she had brought with her. The black-haired man didn't answer her words, but even from his face it was clear that he had no time for sweets. The girl, who noticed that he didn't react to the sweets, asked if he had any appetite at all. When she showed concern for him, the boy asked her about something that had been bothering him for a long time, namely about the day when they went to the lake. With tears in his eyes, the hero raised his head and asked if it was true that nothing had happened, since he didn't remember anything after he almost fell into the lake. The girl didn't think Hugo was so worried about it. She remembered the doctor's words, who said that until the boy's condition stabilized, it would be better to hide the fact of memory loss. The girl smiled with difficulty and replied that he had simply received a severe shock. The child looked at her intently, mentally complaining that he felt strange after that day. When the main character noticed his gaze, she softly asked what happened. At that moment, the girl's face blurred before the boy's eyes and her angry face flashed before him. But it turned out to be just his imagination, since in reality the girl smiled serenely at him. This was not the first time such visions had flashed before his eyes, and he lied to his stepmother, saying that nothing had happened. He made up an excuse and said that he wanted to taste her cookies as soon as possible. The main character didn't notice anything and hurried him, telling him that these were his favorite chocolate chip cookies. The next day, the girl went to the city to meet one of her friends. The street was empty, and she thought that she was late, although she had arrived before the appointed time, so she decided for herself to leave even earlier next time. The blonde entered the right room and immediately found a dark-haired woman there who called out to her. The former Duchess extended her hand to her and said that she had ordered a couple of dresses for her, and they were ready. The main character smiled and thanked the woman for her concern. As soon as she saw the dress, the Duchess said that she thought that too many gifts would be too much for her daughter-in-law, so she had prepared only one. The girl stared at this garment and could not help but guess what it meant. The next moment, the Duchess confirmed her thoughts by saying that this dress was intended for the heroine's wedding. After her words, the blonde felt somehow uncomfortable because the contract was only for 1 year, and here there was such luxury. But the girl understood perfectly well that she would not be able to refuse the camel, who was trying with all her might to please her. She wondered if she would feel the same way if she had a mother. The Duchess didn't give her much time to think about it, asking her to sit down on the sofa, because in addition to this dress, there were other ones waiting for her. When she obediently sat down, the girl only now realized that there were other dresses and thought that her conscience would eat her up in that case. The woman smiled and admitted that she had always wanted to give her daughter dresses. She walked up to the girl and stroked her head, saying that Leila was like a daughter to her. The main character did not flinch from her touch and replied that she was glad to hear it. The women looked at each other with such love as if they had known each other for a very long time. And at this tremulous moment, someone broke the silence by entering the room. The one who disturbed them was Lucius, who asked how he could not be jealous if the blonde had never smiled at him like that. The Duchess was not at all surprised by his appearance and asked why he had come here, although she had clearly said that she was spending time with her daughter today. The man smiled and suggested that they spend some time with their son instead, to which his mother replied that she had no need for that at all. This did not upset him in the least, and he sarcastically remarked that she was very glad to see him, and her face was positively shining with happiness. The woman advised him to see a doctor as soon as possible because she thought he needed to have his eyesight checked. The blonde couldn't understand how family members could talk to each other like that, although she thought it wasn't that bad. After finishing his argument with his mother, Lucius sat down next to the girl and said that, be that as it may, it was difficult for him to hide where he was going. The young man softened and, looking at the girl, asked how she had been going through all this time. The main character also smiled and replied that everything was fine with her. The man started to act up and asked to be consoled because his mother had just scolded him. The girl was stunned for a second by such childishness and didn't know what to answer him. At this point, the Duchess intervened and advised her not to follow his lead, as she would spoil him completely and he would complain more and more. When the blonde asked if it was true, the black-haired one nodded affirmatively, commenting on how glad she was that they were engaged. The young man was so insistent that he would never marry that the woman was curious about what would happen next. She touched the blonde's head again and said that her son had found the man with whom he wanted to connect his future life. The woman added that this child was very cute and she liked him very much, and such words made the heroine's nose tingle. The girl hid her face from them, thinking that in a year she would have to leave and she could not deceive the Duchess like that. She glanced carefully at her future husband and saw that he was looking at her intently. Having decided something for herself, the girl already wanted to admit that she was not her son's real bride. But she was interrupted by the Duke, who pressed her to him and said that it was the greatest fortune of his life to be able to take her as Leila. The Duchess nodded with satisfaction and replied that since he knew this, he should leave them alone, since Leila still had a lot of dresses to try on. The blonde felt uncomfortable again because not only could she not tell the truth, but she was still going to try on dresses. The young man immediately noticed her hesitation and asked if everything was okay. He assumed that she was tired due to the high workload of the last few days, and even the Duchess felt guilty about putting pressure on her. The girl thoughtfully lowered her head, thinking that she needed to solve the problem of the mine that was now owned by the Seven Hills, and also conduct an investigation and find out about the Ark of Blake. She also needs to practice using the ring to teach Hugo, and he's not in his element right now because of his memory loss, and she needs to figure it out completely. The Duchess turned to her and said that the example of paying for things was not simple and would take longer than she thought, and that Leila did not need to adjust to her. The blonde asked her for forgiveness and promised to find time later. The black-haired girl complimented her again, saying that the blonde was so cute that she was even ashamed. She said that she would take care of the decorations for their wedding and assured Leila that she did not need to think about it and to leave everything to her. After her words, Lucius immediately rose from his seat and suggested that they leave together. The young man whispered in her ear that they would go somewhere where they would be alone and no one would disturb them, and the girl smiled. It took her a second to realize that the man meant that they weren't going back home. When the girl sat down opposite the young man, she asked where they were going. The Duke smiled and said that he wanted her to figure it out for herself, saying that he thought she would like the place. The blonde thought for a moment, and then suggested out loud that they were going to a chocolate shop, and in response the young man asked if she wanted that. The girl really thought they were going to a pastry shop and felt like the king from the fairy tale about the king with a sweet tooth. The young man did not know such a fairy tale and asked the girl to tell him more about it. The blonde started talking about how there once was a king who loved chocolate so much that he ordered a palace to be built for him out of chocolate. Admiring the beautiful palace, he was very happy. But the king did not foresee one thing: when the sun reached its zenith, his entire palace melted. The king died buried under the melted palace, never having been able to part with it. The girl said that he loved chocolate so much that he was happy when it melted before his eyes. She considered herself as greedy and stupid as that king, because even knowing that she would have to leave in a year, she continued to hope. Even remembering that moment when they were in the clothes store, the girl believed that Lucius just wanted to convince his mother. But no matter how well she knew the original plot, the girl was not subject to the feelings of the real protagonist. After all, what he said after her words made the girl perk up and look into his eyes. The young man commented that he understood the king's feelings since he loved chocolate very much, and he loved the main character. He admitted that he would be happy to die in the arms of the one he loved, and his words made the girl blush. The Duke touched the girl's hand and asked if she wanted to get married for real instead of signing a contract for a year. The girl looked into his face and wondered if Lucius really liked her. She immediately refuted this thought, thinking that as soon as she stopped giving him useful information, he would lose interest in her. So this meant that the main character would be the one who remained in the melted mansion. The man noticed her hesitation and told her she didn't need to answer, now saying that they seemed to be in place. The young man extended his hand to help her out of the carriage and assured her that she would like it. The blonde was grateful to Lucius for the offer, but she thought that she would choke to death just like the Chocolate King, and was probably just too scared to act. When the young people got out of the carriage, the girl realized that they had stopped near a studio. The girl turned to the man and asked why they were here, because if they needed to sew, they could have stayed in their previous place. The young man smiled and answered mysteriously that she would understand as soon as she came in. The young men crossed the threshold of the salon, but the girl still could not understand what was so special about it. Deciding not to ask questions for now, the girl thought that there must be some reason why the Duke brought her here. At this time, the young man was talking to the worker, and he bowed and replied that he understood everything. The girl approached him cautiously and assumed that he had something planned, and the man made it clear that this was exactly what was going on. After some time, the man brought a box containing men's clothes that were too small for Lucius. It was only a second later that the girl realized that the young man had prepared clothes for Hugo. The protagonist explained that he had prepared the clothes that their son should wear at the wedding. The girl didn't even think about clothes for Hugo, so it seemed to her that Lucius was a better guardian for him than she was. She couldn't hide her sad expression, but thanked him for thinking of Hugo, adding that he would be happy. Lucius smiled and explained that he noticed that she was so busy, so he decided to take care of the matter for her. The girl was pleased by his words, and she commented that Hugo needed to try it on as soon as possible. For the main character, this meant that he needed to arrange a wedding as soon as possible so that it could happen. Leila fell for his provocation and agreed with him in a trembling voice, hiding her reddened face. The man put his arm around her shoulders and asked her to let him know if the size didn't fit, since he chose it by eye and wasn't sure it would fit him. And now they had to move on because they had another destination that Lucius had prepared. The store worker behind them bowed and said that he would send the clothes to the Marshall estate. When the young people were getting into the carriage, the girl noticed a familiar figure in the crowd and stopped. It was Baron Blake, with his familiar red hair, smiling at something. The Duke asked where she was looking, and the girl pointed at the man. When the blonde asked if he remembered him, the young man made a displeased face. The black-haired man made it clear that he knew Baron Blake, whom they had seen at the Hiln family party. The young man asked why she was asking if he knew him, as she had looked at the man the last time. The blonde felt sick and asked him not to say such strange things as he had said last time, but Lucius did not believe her. While the young man was interrogating her, asking why she was looking at the Baron like that, the one they were talking about entered the alley. The blonde said with a serious expression that she thought they needed to follow Baron Blake. She grabbed the Duke's arm and pulled him in that direction, saying that she would explain everything later. The young man smiled contentedly and agreed, replying that it would be the first time he would pursue someone, but he would try. They successfully caught up with the Baron, and the black-haired man asked why he was so serious, and the girl hissed at him so that they could be heard. The man walked into some room, and the black-haired man said that it was quite risky, and they should not follow him. The girl thought that they could not return empty-handed after such a journey. The black-haired man continued to say that it was dangerous to go inside, but they could look around a little, and the girl agreed. The Duke noticed that the whole building was rather strangely constructed, as there were no windows on the lower floors. The man asked if they were hiding something, and the blonde agreed that it was suspicious and meant they were up to something. The main character suggested sending the ring and finding out what exactly they were doing there. The man scattered the ring into his hand and said that there seemed to be nothing remarkable outside the building. The young man asked why the girl found this man suspicious, and she decided to share her doubts with him. She said that this man was involved in some kind of business with Dawson Hill, but even Hill Sr. does not know what kind of relationship these two have, which made even the Duke think. The hero smiled and suggested that they go back because they might get caught, and he could explore the building himself later. The blonde looked him in the eyes and thanked him, after which she immediately asked for forgiveness. The protagonist asked what she was apologizing for, and she replied that she had detained him because of her suspicions. The man smiled wearily and replied that it was already quite late, and it seemed that they would no longer be able to go where he had planned. And when the girl became worried, he assured her that everything was fine and they still had a lot of time ahead of them. For the girl, this meant that he apparently wanted to stay with her even after the contract expired. But she immediately dismissed this thought, realizing that a year was already quite a long time for their so-called relationship. The girl decided to go first and hurried the young man until the sun finally set. No one could guess what was going on in the head of the always cold-blooded Duke. When night fell, an unexpected visitor came to the main character. The man asked why he had come all this way here, and after the question the stranger took off his hood. The blonde smiled and said that he knew about his marriage to Mrs. Marshall and came to congratulate him, but the black-haired man did not believe him and asked if it was necessary to come so late. The man asked to be understood that he was a little busy, but had come all this way because he did not know that the Duke intended to make Mrs. Marshall part of the Upert family. The protagonist made it clear that he didn't know what he was getting at, and the blonde asked if he really didn't know about her past. At the same time, the blonde also arrived back at the Marshall's estate. The girl was about to head to her room, but a child's voice called out to her, which could only belong to Hugo. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he hadn't gone to bed yet, and the hero of the novel replied that he was waiting for her return. The heroine realized that they hadn't had a normal conversation since the day the boy asked if nothing really happened that day when he fell into the lake. After all, Hugo came to her first, so the girl decided to meet him halfway and asked if he wanted to tell her something. The girl suggested going to her room, but the boy shook his head convulsively. The main character of the novel said that he wants to show his mother his game room, and only then did the blonde remember that she had asked to make a playroom for Hugo. She smiled tenderly at her child and made it clear that she wanted to watch it with him. The boy smiled happily and assured her that they would have a lot of fun. Thus, the main character and the boy found themselves in the playroom. The girl was glad that Jane had fulfilled her request perfectly and noticed how many books there were, to which the boy replied that he was going to read them all. She thought that if she had known that he would like the room so much, she would have asked to make it a playroom a long time ago. The blonde continued to talk about how it was time to go to bed and asked if he wanted her to read him a book. After Hugo nodded his head, the girl suggested that they sit on the sofa so that they would be more comfortable. The girl began to look through the shelves and wondered what kind of book he would like. She finally picked out a book full of cute little animals, just like Hugo. The child saw what book she wanted to read to him and admitted that he knew nothing about it, and after his words, the girl froze in place. She turned to the boy and asked how he had been feeling in recent days, and the hero replied that everything was fine. The blonde explained that he said he couldn't remember anything from the moment he fell into the lake, and that's why she was worried about his condition. The girl asked him to be sure to tell her if he felt any pain, and if he feels uncomfortable turning to the heroine, he can at least tell Jane about it. The boy stared at his stepmother, and she smiled reassuringly at him in return. At this moment, the main character suddenly felt danger and shuddered, which Leila noticed. The blonde asked what happened, but the boy didn't want to tell her what was bothering him. But after some hesitation, he admitted that there really was something in that lake and that sometimes something strange happens in his body. When the young man told her that he sometimes felt nauseous, the main character was horrified. She started asking him if he had a fever, if he had eaten something bad, and if he had slept well. Now she knew that the boy had found something in the lake and had fallen while trying to catch it, so she decided to call the doctor or bring some pills. But Hugo stopped her. The boy touched her hand and said that this happens very rarely, so she shouldn't worry, and in fact, he was waiting for her today to tell her that he was okay. The hero reassured her by saying that the lost memories were gradually returning, just as the doctor and Jane had said. The girl now understood that he was trying to talk to her, but she continued to avoid him. She was well aware that she would have to leave Hugo, but before she could leave, she had to work hard. The main character, like no one else, wanted her adopted son to be happy and not know adversity. But to do this, he first needs to be distracted, so she suggested trying something more fun than reading. The main character of the novel could not even imagine what she had planned, and asked her to tell him in more detail what they would play. The blonde learned to shoot a ring from a pistol, and if she showed it, she was sure that he would like it. The girl pointed the gun in front of her and fired it at the ceiling. The child gasped in admiration and commented that what she had done shone just like a star. The blonde also smiled and said that it was her ring, asking if it was beautiful. The boy did not understand what she was talking about, and the girl next to him said that he too could create such shining stars. Hugo couldn't believe his luck and looked down at his hands for a moment. The girl looked at him and thought that she wanted him to quickly learn how to create a ring, and for this, she needed to make her wish to Cosette. The next day, the girl worked hard in her office to get everything done on time. At this point, she was interrupted by the head maid, who entered the room and said that the lady had received a letter. The Viscountess asked her to leave him there, and as soon as the maid left, the blonde got tired and grabbed her head. She had a lot of things to do, for example, related to the head of the family, since she had to ask him to organize a party so that she could establish her status as a noble lady. Blake's friend will also be invited, and they will be able to track him while being right next to him. The girl straightened up abruptly, wondering if Lucius had learned anything about that mission, since there had been no news from him until now. She was just about to write to him when she remembered the letter that Jane had given her. The blonde examined it carefully and noticed that there was nothing written on it, suggesting that it was from that same person. At the same time, the main character was sitting in his office and did not know what to do with the information he received from the blonde. The blonde opened the letter and began to read the contents with a serious expression on her face. From the contents, the girl learned that the unknown person considered her his little sister and thought that it was time for them to meet in a week. It was a convenient moment and meant that he was meeting Madame Marshall regularly. If he had known Madame Marshall before, he would immediately notice that she had changed, but she should still meet this man at least once. It was necessary to find out the sender of this unpleasant letter, but one thing was clear. It was not Lucius who sent it, so I needed to write to him myself. Some time passed from that moment, and now her future husband appeared before the girl. He casually lounged in her chair and commented on how glad he was to see her. The girl did not react at all and asked why he was here when he had not even warned her about his visit. Lucius must have asked Jane not to tell her about his arrival in order to arrange a surprise. The blonde didn't scold her and asked her to serve tea since they had a guest. When they were alone, the girl sat down opposite him and asked what was the matter, and the young man replied that he had come not to talk about business, but because he simply wanted to see her. The girl said that she had just written him a letter, but if she had known that he would come, she would have simply told him everything in person. The blonde decided not to focus on this and asked if he had found out anything about the building where Baron Blake had gone. The young man hesitated for a moment and then admitted that he had not recognized anything, causing the girl to look at him more closely. The man was not embarrassed by this and explained that their wedding was coming soon, but when he thought about it, he realized that they barely knew each other. He asked the girl to tell him about herself, for example, about her hobbies, tastes, that is, something that he should know about her. The girl flinched, wondering why he suddenly started talking about this and thought that he was worried that trouble would arise after the engagement. But the problem is that she knows almost nothing about Madame Marshall, so she smiled wearily and replied that if something like that had happened, she would have shared it with him long ago. The man looked at her intently and asked why it was so important to her that among the conditions of their marriage was the clause that Hugo should be chosen as successor. The girl hesitated for a second as she never expected to hear such a question from him. But then she decided that she needed to be honest, and meeting his eyes again, she admitted that she only wanted happiness for Hugo. The young man, who had doubted her a little after the dossier the prince had given him, shuddered at her words. Not noticing his reaction, the girl continued to talk about how Hugo's biological father did not value him, and the boy was always alone while he dated women. She added that this was why she wanted Hugo to have a good father, which made Lucius stare at her for a moment, thoughtful. The young man remembered how the blonde man told him that Mrs. Marshall killed her husband with her own hands. He offered to provide him with evidence if the young man did not believe him. Given the circumstances, it was almost certain that the Viscount Marshall had not died a natural death, and he could not be certain that it was Leila's doing. Well, even if she is guilty, the girl probably did it for the sake of her adopted son. The man did not believe that this expression on her face was fake. Besides, the woman who killed her husband without hesitation for the sake of her non-native son chose him as the new father for this child. The young man touched his mouth, where a smile began to blossom as his mood somehow improved. The girl noticed that he was acting strangely and asked if there was something wrong. The young man replied that everything was fine and changed the subject by asking if this meant that she thought he would be a good father to Hugo. The blonde admitted that she initially came to him because she thought that the Hupert family would be able to protect Hugo. In the original story, Lucius was not a good father. He thought of Hugo only as a good friend and was not disappointed. As a result, Hugo, who never received warmth and love from people, became a tyrant because he could not heal his wounds. But as she spent more and more time with the Duke, the girl realized that he was much better than she thought. People had always been afraid of the Juper family and looked at the Duke as a monster, so the girl's words that she was glad that they were a family came as a surprise to him. At first, this woman interested him because she fearlessly proposed marriage. Or maybe he was touched by the fact that she was the only person who approached him without hesitation, so he didn't care even if she was a murderer. After a short silence, the girl thought that instead of asking Cosette for a favor from her future husband, it would be faster. The girl asked Lucius to teach her adopted son how to handle rings, and the man tried to get out of it, saying that he was not very good at teaching others. The blonde stared at him with glowing eyes and informed him that Hugo knew how to use them. The young man asked in surprise if he really knew how to handle rings, and the girl realized that she could not say that she had read this in a book. So the girl lied to him, explaining that it just seemed that way to her. The girl explained that this could be considered female intuition, and she simply felt that Hugo had potential. Although she failed to convince him, the girl asked the man to show his ring to Hugo, as he seemed to like it when she showed hers. This time the man smiled and nodded his head, noting that it was not difficult. As soon as he gave a positive answer, the girl brought her adopted son into the room and began to hurry Lucius. The boy felt a little uncomfortable, but without paying attention to it, the Duke obediently began to concentrate his power into his hand. As soon as the young man showed his rings, the boy gasped in delight, as this was the second time he had seen such a phenomenon. The girl smiled happily and asked if this ring was also very beautiful, even though it was different from the one she showed him yesterday. The boy was about to answer her, but suddenly he felt a cold chill run through his entire body. The main character of the novel felt ill and began to cough heavily, which alarmed his mother. Lucius also felt uneasy about this picture, but he couldn't do anything and just looked at it. The child was quickly put to bed, and as soon as he woke up, the boy said that he seemed to see something and felt sick. He continued to talk about how his head suddenly started spinning, and everything started swimming before his eyes. While she was thinking that Hugo was probably so surprised by Lucius's ring because it was different from hers, the Duke admitted that he had probably overdone it and that one would have been enough. The girl turned her whole body towards him and assured him that he was not guilty of anything, because it was she who asked him to show Hugo the ring. But the young man still felt guilty and turned to the boy and asked if he was okay. Very nervously, he replied that everything was fine now, and the Duke gently stroked his head, commenting that the most important thing was that he was okay. The child felt uncomfortable and asked for forgiveness for causing them so much trouble. Immediately after his words, the main character came to her senses and began to furiously deny his statement. The girl took his hand and reminded him that she had asked Hugo not to talk like that. His head was just spinning and he didn't need to apologize to them for it. At first, the boy couldn't believe what he heard, but then he softened and, smiling, replied that he understood everything. Some time passed from that moment, and now the young people left the boy alone and walked around the garden. As they walked around the garden, the young man noticed a wooden swing nearby. The Duke asked whether this was the same swing that the blonde had asked to be repaired and which he wanted in his mansion. The blonde nodded and said that her adopted son really liked this swing. The black-haired man grinned and commented that he would like them to be hanged on his territory soon. The girl didn't understand what he meant and asked why he needed them there. The young man admitted that he was going to build them because he wanted Leila to move in with him. After his sincere statement, the main character flinched as if she had been slapped. She couldn't promise him anything, so she changed the subject and asked what was wrong with the building that Baron Black had entered. The man stared at her for a moment, fully aware that she was not ready to give him an answer. Deciding not to insist this time, he turned away and replied that it was just an abandoned building. The blonde asked for details, and the young man said that at least that's how it looked from the outside, since the building was registered as an ordinary residential property and its current owner is unknown. This means that the owner probably wants to hide the fact that he owns the entire building at the moment, and it was obvious that something was wrong with this house. The blonde wondered how they could figure out what exactly was wrong with him. At least it was obvious that he was related to Baron Blake. The main character decided for herself that she needed to invite him to a party and find out everything. She was so immersed in her thoughts that she didn't notice how the Duke had already tried several times to attract her attention. When the man poked her in the cheek, the girl came to her senses and exclaimed that he had scared her. And the man noticed that she was in the clouds and he had to do it. The blonde explained that she was thinking about Baron Blake, and the man opposite her was unhappy with this fact. He put his hand on her shoulder and asked her to stop thinking about that man. The young man came close to her ear and reminded her that she didn't need a ram when she had him. The atmosphere became awkward, and the girl realized that she needed to put her thoughts in order. The girl tactfully pushed Lucius away and asked for forgiveness, explaining that she was so interested in finding out that she even sent him a letter. This statement raised the Duke's spirits, as before she had never written him a letter first. The blonde felt uncomfortable and very nervous. She mentally added that this was more of a meaningful note. The young man smiled and said that he would then go and write her an answer on beautiful paper. The girl noticed that he was not exactly refined in romanticism, and the man was offended that she had not thought so before. Only then did the girl realize that she had always thought about Lucius from the original story, where he was extremely cold. It seems the girl had unconsciously been thinking about Lucius with bias since reading the original. She exhaled with excitement, realizing that now a living Lucius was standing right in front of her. The girl laughed out loud, commenting that if you think about it, the man really was always romantic with her. By this time, they had already approached the swing, and the girl invited Lucius to ride. The young man noticed that under his weight they would scatter into splinters, and the girl replied that she hadn't even thought about it. To ease the awkwardness, the Duke said he could rock her instead. At first, the girl looked at him in surprise and then commented that she was a little scared. The main character immediately became worried and asked what she was afraid of. The blonde hesitated and remembered their previous conversation when the man asked her to tell about herself. About her hobbies, tastes, that is, everything he should know about the main character. The girl realized that perhaps the words about her being afraid of the swing seemed strange when she herself asked him to fix it. The blonde decided to share her past with him, telling him that her father abused her when she was little. She liked to play on the swing, and he would grab her hand and pull her off it so she wasn't afraid of the swing itself. She just still had unpleasant memories of those times. She thought that it was quite normal to talk about this, since the cause of death of the Marshall family was unknown. The main character didn't even notice that after her words, the young man's face became stern, as if he wanted to take revenge on someone. As the black-haired man rode back to the estate, he was still thinking about her words about her father abusing her. According to his sources, Leila grew up in an orphanage from birth, and the director of that orphanage was a woman, so he couldn't figure out who the father she was talking about was. But the man quickly dismissed thoughts about this as he had more important things to do. After all, a certain blonde man came to him and asked the Duke if he had thought about his proposal. A week later, the main character came to meet the mysterious stranger who sent her letters. The girl immediately noticed the lady sitting at the table, and she had a feeling that she had seen her somewhere before. When she approached the table, the main character realized that it was Countess Edith Nefeli. The blonde immediately thought that it didn't look like she was the one who sent her the letter, since she and Mrs. Marshall weren't close. It seemed that the mysterious sender had not yet appeared, so the girl sat down at the next table. And as soon as she sat down, the girl with blue hair stood up from her place, which the heroine immediately noticed. She thought that the girl was uncomfortable being in her company, and she decided to leave. But to her surprise, she approached her. The girl greeted her warmly, and the blonde nodded in response, mentally asking if she had any business with her. The lady asked why her sister didn't even say hello to her, although she thought that they had decided to get closer. The main character did not understand at all what she was talking about, and why she suddenly wanted to get closer to her. At the same time, the woman sat down opposite her and asked why the blonde wasn't wearing the earrings she had given her and nothing else she had sent her in recent days. After all, once upon a time the main character wore her gifts every day, and the blonde realized that those earrings were a gift from Edith, and that she really sent the letter. The reader of the novel suggested that Edith was something like a patroness for the Viscountess, and therefore received something in return. And I decided to contact her directly because there was no news from her. When Edith asked if the girl thought about the fact that she had sent this letter to Leila, the blonde was in a stupor. The heroine realized that Mrs. Marshall did not know who the sender was, and it was most likely a trap. Deciding that it was time to stop playing games, Leila asked her directly why she had called her. In her opinion, the girl gave her a gift in order to get something in return, but the other party assured that this was not the case. The main character could not believe that it was a gift from the heart. With a suspicious expression on her face, she asked how many letters Lady Edith had sent her. She eventually found out that the girl had sent her letters 23 times and had also sent her gifts 8 times. She couldn't understand why Edith was bothering so much with Mrs. Marshall. But considering that the Viscountess had kept all the blue-haired woman's letters and gifts, it meant that he was also a dear person to her. While she was thinking about this, the girl with blue hair asked whether Leila guessed that it was her or not. The blonde answered honestly that of course she didn't know about it. Edith asked if she had managed to surprise her, but the blonde remained serious and asked why she had sent her all these gifts. After all, she came because she was interested in it, and Edith also decided to be frank with her. She replied that at first she sent them to her because she liked her, but now she wanted to be her assistant. Recently, the girl noticed that Leila often meets with Mr. Kiln. It seemed like something was going on, and she was curious. But she didn't dig into it because she needed to ask the blonde directly. The main character could not understand how she found out about this, because this information was not disclosed. But no matter how suspicious she was of her, the girl understood that Edith's information could be useful to her. So the blonde nodded her head and replied that if the lady wanted to help her, she would tell her everything. When she saw her happy expression, the girl thought that most likely she wasn't lying when she said that she liked her. At that moment, a girl in a maid's uniform approached them and, asking for forgiveness for interrupting them, served them drinks. The girl with blue hair announced that she had prepared this milk for Leila, and the heroine wondered how Edith knew that she didn't like tea. For example, the Emperor was absolutely sure that she loved tea and asked her to try a new variety as soon as possible. The heroine assumed that Edith became close to her, knowing that Mrs. Marshall and she had different tastes. When the lady suggested signing the contract, the blonde thought that she couldn't just ignore it and replied that she would sign it. But not right now. After she promised to contact her later, the blonde left feeling squeezed like a lemon. When the knight accompanying her saw the girl in such a state, he asked what happened. The heroine said that she did not need an escort, but this was not the safest place in the young man's opinion. The blonde took him away that everything was fine and it was safe there, mentally adding that he would never have thought that the meeting with Edith would go so well. The young man did not wonder why she asked his master for a favor just in case, and asked permission to accompany her. The main character silently offered him her hand so that he could help her get into the carriage. When everything was ready for Leila's departure, the knight accompanying her noticed his acquaintance. It was a well-known knight named Kize, and the brunette could not understand what he was doing here. The young man called out to the main character and asked her to wait a second. Immediately after she gave her consent, the knight approached the man with gray hair and began to talk to him hurriedly about something. After Cosette explained the whole situation to him, the dark-haired man with a tired expression grabbed his head. He approached the girl again and said that he had been called away, so now he needed to get back to work. The young man pointed to another knight and announced that this guy would escort Leila instead of him. As soon as he was introduced, the man with gray hair greeted the Viscountess in the proper manner. When the girl saw one of the main characters of the novel, she smiled and said that she was glad to meet them. Since the young man's face always seemed emotionless, this time he simply looked away and did not answer. And unlike him, Rutger looked at the girl with pitiful eyes and asked her to contact him next time when she needed an escort. Even Kizet felt that the other knight was being too intrusive and, slamming the carriage door behind him, ordered them to drive on. Thus he left behind a distraught knight who was not allowed to say a proper farewell to the lady. The main character watched the road carefully and noticed that they were not going to the marshal's estate. The girl found this strange, so she raised her head with curiosity. She smiled amiably at one of the main characters of the novel and asked where they were going. This question left the gray-haired man stumped, as he had not expected it at all. With an awkward expression, he asked if the vice-captain really hadn't told her anything, and the girl nodded her head in response. The man quickly realized his mistake and explained that Madame Camerlin was waiting for the heroine. The young man apologized for not telling him about it right away, and the blonde assured him that nothing terrible had happened, which meant there was a reason for it. She decided to change the subject and asked where Rutger was in such a hurry, and the knight said that Roxana, the leader of the knights, had called him. They say they found what they had been looking for a long time, and now they need to go get it. The blonde immediately realized that they had found another broken ring and asked if it was okay that Kizet wouldn't go there. Leila immediately realized that it was bothering him, and that meant that something had happened. She felt uncomfortable seeing him sad, so she touched his hand in support. She wanted to comfort him and tell him not to be upset, but it had the opposite effect. When he twitched, the girl assumed that they were not that close yet, and this was too much. This made her feel awkward, and she pressed her hands to herself and asked if Lucius had told him about her request. The man asked for details, and the blonde explained that when she arrived at the Uppert mansion, she asked to find out if Kizet could teach her son to use the ring. The young man replied that my lord had not told him anything because he did not like to share personal matters. The girl continued to talk about how Hugo seemed to have talent, and she would like him to master this ring as soon as possible, and thus be able to help the Duchy of the Upperts in the future. She smiled and shared her thoughts that Kizet would be a good teacher. The heroine even planned to use her wish, which she won in a bet with the knight, for this purpose. While she was saying this, the young man stared at her and, realizing it, asked for forgiveness, bowing his head before her. The man with gray hair looked away and promised to fulfill this request if my lord allowed him. Some time passed, and now the girl finally arrived at her destination. There she was met by the main character's mother, and she hugged the blonde she hadn't seen for a long time. When she admitted that she missed her very much, Leila said that she was just about to come visit, and then asked why the Duchess invited her. Only then did the woman realize that she should have informed in advance that the wedding preparations were almost complete. After she told the girl about it, the other side became nervous because it happened very quickly. The Duchess said that they only had to sort out the nuances, such as setting a date and sending out wedding invitations. It was very soon, and the girl did not think that they would get married so quickly. Not noticing her thoughtful expression, the black-haired girl presented her with a gift with a smile. She explained that now that the girl had officially become part of this family, she needed to be greeted properly. For the heroine, it was only a marriage by contract, but they continued to give her gifts, which is why the blonde wanted to tell the truth. Leila was pulled out of such thoughts by the main character's mother, who began to hurry her. So the main character had no choice but to open a small chest. And inside the chest, the girl saw a crystal ball where she was depicted with her adopted son and the current Duke Jupert. The black-haired girl asked, with a smile, if Leila liked her gift, explaining that the ring would protect her lunch. She added that she would more accurately protect him if something like that were to happen, but the blonde no longer listened to her. The girl understood perfectly well that if there was a Camerlin ring inside, It would probably be very difficult to create something like that, so she sincerely thanked the former Duchess. The woman brushed off her gratitude, saying that there was no need to say anything, and that the main thing was that she liked it. This made the main character's soul feel warm, and she couldn't get rid of the smile on her face. Some time had passed since that moment, and now the Hizit was escorting the girl back to the carriage. When the doors opened, the blonde saw that there was already someone inside and asked what was going on. Her future husband was sitting there, and hearing her question, he replied that he had come to pick her up. When the girl gave him her hand and asked if he was busy, the man replied that he had just finished his business and had immediately come for her. At that moment, the man with gray hair bowed to my lord and said that since the Duke had arrived, he would follow them. When the young man disappeared from their sight, the Duke turned to the girl again and noticed the box on her lap. The blonde also looked down at her and explained that it was a wedding gift from his mother. The woman said that if this thing is kept in the bedroom, it will protect them from danger. The young man did not agree with this, and said that he would protect her in the bedroom, and instead suggested putting it in Hugo's room. The girl thought it was a good idea, and only then realized that he said that they would have a shared bedroom. The man believed that this was how it should be since they were a couple, and there was no law prohibiting spouses from sharing a single bedroom. There was nothing to answer to such a straightforward reaction from the main character, and the man laughed when she turned away from him. He behaved so calmly that the main character did not even notice that all this time there was a wound on his hand received in battle. While the future spouses were happily chatting with each other, the current emperor was not idle. Reading the note, he commented out loud that he would never have thought that Lucius Jupert was capable of treating this woman so sincerely. He very stupidly lost the spy he sent from the mansion, but he still had some aces up his sleeve. In another carriage that followed the betrothed, one could see the main knights of the duchy discussing something. Roxanne was indignant and asked what they had achieved by chasing shadows in vain again. She wondered why all their efforts always went down the drain, which made it feel like they were marking time. Therefore, Rutger could no longer look the gentleman in the eye, but the girl believed that this was probably because he was only thinking about how he could get away with it. This remark outraged the knight, and he asked if she had anything else to add, and they began to quarrel. The girl with red hair believed that she was right, since she herself would be happy to accompany Leila again today. The young man opposite them, who had been silent until then, could not stand it and asked them to stop arguing. Rutger was indignant and asked how Kize could say such a thing when the deputy commander was about to be beaten up right now. The man with gray hair replied that he could not help in any way and that this matter concerned only the head of the knights and his deputy. Roxanne decided to listen to the man and changed the subject by saying that if Leila had not been there, they would have died today. She asked again how it happened that they lost the shadow they were following, and Rutger agreed with her that Leila was amazing since she managed to make the gentleman completely different next to her. He thought that next time he should at least thank the main character. And when Roxana replied that he should not only thank her but also prepare a gift for her, the Kizet's thoughts were occupied with something else. The young man wondered why the gentleman was losing his knack, although it seemed to him that he already knew the answer to this, and of course it was connected with the future Duchess. Rutger noticed that the knight opposite him was in the clouds and asked what he was thinking about. The young man addressed him familiarly, calling him his friend, which infuriated Hizet. So the hero of the novel, intending to offend, answered that he was thinking about how many more times they could fail the matter. Ignoring the dark-haired man's reaction, he continued asking him why they failed this time, and why he summoned 3 rings. The young man smiled and confidently announced that at least he had not destroyed the scepter, which needed to be returned. Rutger wondered if that was why he was sent on the mission instead of the blonde man. As soon as he sent a warning glance to Rutger, the man began to complain to Roxanne, saying how terrible the other knight was since he wanted to hit him. The commander stopped their argument by saying that neither of them had done anything useful, so they both should keep quiet. One missed the shadow he was supposed to catch, the other didn't take part at all, so she thought they got off easy. In response to her words, the dark-haired man noted that if everything had been as usual, the master would have punished them to the fullest extent, but he heard that Leila saved him. The girl thought for a second and then asked the opinion of the knight with gray hair. The young man decided to share his opinion and said that the gentleman was definitely not hunting for shadows as zealously as before. Roxana agreed with him because although the Duke had discovered traces, it seemed he had become indifferent to the search. The knight next to her also noticed that the man rarely joined them in recent days. After some discussion, Rutger got bored and suggested that perhaps their leader had simply already found the leader of the shadows. This idea seemed crazy to the girl, because it is impossible to just go and find someone you couldn't find for many years. Only then did the man realize that this assumption was indeed quite ridiculous. Evening came, and the main character finally reached her home and said goodbye to the Duke. The head maid was awaiting her arrival and immediately bowed to the heroine. In response, the girl smiled and only now noticed that it was not only Jane who was present there. Near the stairs, the main character was met by her adopted son, who wanted to know her opinion. When the girl saw the boy in his new outfit, she felt that no one in this world could be as cute as him. But the Viscount's son misunderstood her and thought that her silence meant that he looked bad. The blonde shook her head and stroked the boy's head, assuring him that it was very cute and suited him. She asked him if he liked it, and the child smiled and replied that he was happy with everything. When he thanked her for the gift, the girl replied that these clothes were not from her, but from Lucius. After she told him who had given him such a gift, the black-haired man blushed and could not call the Duke his father. The blonde thought that it seemed awkward for him to call him Dad, so she spoke for him. She asked him to be sure to thank the Duke the next time they met, and the boy nodded obediently. When the main character put her adopted son to bed, she went to her bedroom and called her maid. When Jane arrived, the main character handed her a letter and asked her to read it. After the woman read it, she looked at the girl with an awkward expression on her face and asked why she was giving it to her. Leila replied that she gave her the envelope because she wanted to invite her to her wedding, and not as a servant, but as an official guest. After her husband's death, she could not pay due attention to Hugo, and during this time, the brunette took care of him. From now on, the girl will also take care of him and wants Jane to help her. The maid could not believe that in the past, the lady had neglected her only because of shock, and now the Viscountess cared for her more than anyone else, which was a great honor. When Jane thanked the girl, the other side declared that it was the least she could do for her. The blonde asked if the woman would follow her to the Eupert estate when she got married, and the maid replied that if it was her will, she would do it. But the heroine interrupted her and added that the other party would not go as a maid, as her assistant and Hugo's nanny. Seeing Jane's stunned face, the blonde explained that she offered her a higher one because they cared about her. This statement deeply touched the woman, and she did not bow to the Viscountess, promising to try her best. This made the girl feel relieved because Hugo would have such a caring person left with her when she left Lucius. Some time has passed since that moment, and now the main character has decided to visit her partner herself. The girl was pleasantly surprised and asked why Leila had come, and instead of answering, the blonde handed her a document. These were papers about the daughter of Count Nefili, and the main character explained that Lady Edith could soon become their new partner. The lady could not understand why the Count's daughter would make any deal with them. The blonde said that they had not made any deals yet, but Lady Edith might demand something. Leila asked what exactly she would want if she asked for it as payment when the heroine met her today and signed the contract. But the redhead had no idea. She was known in social circles, but her personal information was hidden, so the red-haired woman offered to meet her and find out in person since she had become such good friends with the blonde. But this was a problem for the heroine, because she was worried that the girl might find out that she was not the real Leila. Until the drawn-up contract was signed, the heroine believed that she needed to be careful. When she told the girl across from her about her plans, the redhead became enthusiastic and wished her luck. Her reaction seemed very strange to the main character, so Leila asked what she was doing. Because she was not understood, the lady also felt awkward, and she explained that she was thus supporting the Viscountess so that she could successfully meet Lady Nefili. The blonde had by this time stood up from her seat and announced that the other party should also go with her. It was a contract to make Miss Helen the head of the family, and one of the parties to the contract could not be absent, and even though it was true, the girl was a little surprised. She explained that she could not believe that Lady Nefeli would make her the head of the family, since the Earl's family maintained friendly relations with Dawson. When the blonde asked if this information was accurate, the lady said that she sometimes saw Count Nefeli visiting Dawson on personal matters, although he had not been seen lately. From this, the main character did not understand why Edith would decide to become a support for the Signor. She decided that it was useless to worry about it, because she didn't know why Edith wanted to get information out of her. The blonde warned her partner that the place they were heading to could be a snake den, so she should be extremely careful. When the girl made it clear that she understood her, they headed straight to the meeting place, accompanied by a butler. Finally, they found themselves inside the right room where they were met by a girl with blue hair. The girl greeted her sister enthusiastically with a bright smile on her face. Edith asked why there had been no news from the blonde for so long, and the other side apologized for keeping her waiting. After the formalities were completed, the heroine turned to the red-haired woman and introduced her to another lady. The girl with blue hair smiled at Signor and asked her to call herself simply Edith. The lady did not expect such a good reception at all and awkwardly said that she was pleased to meet her. At this point, they had already sat down on the sofa and were preparing to sign the agreement that had been discussed earlier. The blonde handed the papers to the other side and offered to read them, but Edith replied that there was no need for that and she would sign everything right away. And the main character was a bit of a pedestrian and then asked if she really agreed to make the Signor the head of the Hiln family. After all, she heard the Nephili family supports Dawson, who is first in line to inherit. As soon as she heard her question, Edith suddenly became frightening and asked if Miss Signor's support was the opinion that Leila expressed as the wife of the Duke of Opera. The blonde carefully answered that everything was correct and that the young man also supported the Signor as the next chapter. The blue-haired girl smiled again and commented that then she had no more reason not to support Miss Signor. In any case, her father must soon hand over the position of head of the family to her, the only direct heir, and then the opinion of the Nephili family will become her opinion. In any case, she was genuinely interested in the main character, so she just wanted to help her little sister. After her statement, the blonde asked, since when she liked her so much, and the woman answered that at first she was disappointed that such a man as the Viscount Marshal had a beautiful wife. So she started sending letters to find out if the newly minted Viscountess needed help. There was no answer, and she gave up. But one day, the Viscount Marshal suddenly died. But what is more surprising is that after his death, the girl coped with everything perfectly without her help. From that moment on, she changed her attitude towards the heroine, and one can say that her character, which is so different from what was in the past, is to her taste. It was a little strange, but the blonde was glad to hear it, because Edith began to love her after she moved into this body. At this point, the blue-haired girl changed the subject and said that she was a little worried about the Lady Signor. After all, she doesn't yet know how to control her emotions, and people won't like that at all. The blonde said that she had also thought about this, so she suggested meeting with Lucius, who would definitely help with controlling emotions. This statement caused the Signora great shock, as she had not at all planned to meet the Grand Duke. Some time had passed since that moment, and now the blonde was telling what had happened, and why the gentleman was planning to organize a party as soon as possible. Therefore, the main character asked the man to also participate in this, which made the hero look at her with a smile. In response, the man asked if she knew about an important event that was about to take place soon, and the girl looked at him questioningly. The young man approached her and announced that their wedding ceremony would take place in 3 weeks. The blonde couldn't believe that time had flown by so quickly, and there were only a few weeks left. This was a big problem because while she was worried about the Signor, she completely forgot about the wedding. When the young man looked at his bride, who clutched her hair in despair, he admitted that he was sad. After all, she was so inattentive to her own wedding and was the only bride who didn't even remember the date of the ceremony. The girl immediately began to frantically deny this. The man hid his facial expression from her, so the heroine did not notice his fleeting grin. She thought he was angry with her, so she smiled and asked for forgiveness for her inattention. Reaching out to him, she touched his cheek and said that of course she was also waiting for their wedding, but lately she had been too busy, so everything was forgotten. The blonde continued to talk about how the timing was perfect, and she would be ready for the wedding. At that moment, the young man asked where they were going for their honeymoon, and the girl could not believe that in a 1-year contract marriage, they would go on a honeymoon. They were busy people and would hardly be able to find time for this, but the man really wanted to go, so he asked if she had any wishes. The young man assumed that she would want to go to the sea, and the girl would really like to go on a trip with Lucius and Hugo and create a lot of memories, but she will be sorry to leave them, and the more memories, the harder it will be to leave. When she thought about it, the main character had to smile weakly and suggest to think about it later. The man understood her and replied that he was ready to go with her anywhere. He decided to change the subject and asked the girl if she knew that at the ceremony, the bride and groom make vows in front of the guests. The girl replied that she knew about it, but had never been to a wedding ceremony, so she didn't know how it was given. At that moment, the man came close to her and whispered in her ear that the bride and groom should kiss. The girl was not at all embarrassed and thought that she had already heard about this. She asked if it wasn't necessary, could they skip that part anyway, kissing is awkward. This statement took the young man by surprise, but he quickly recovered and categorically stated that this could not be done. The Duke explained that this was the most important part of the ceremony, and he had heard that it could not be omitted. The girl looked down thoughtfully, and after some thought decided to agree to this since it was so important. At this point, the young man smiled and suggested one way that would make it less awkward. The man blushed a little, but suggested spending the night together at the Rebirth mansion. The blonde didn't know if she could live with him and become close enough to kiss. But anyway, to prepare for the party, she needed Lucius's help, so she replied that it was a great idea. A few days later, as Lucius had said, she and Hugo began living in the Rebirth mansion, and the boy was assigned a personal tutor. And the main character was diligently preparing for the Signora party. Looking at the letter she received, the girl thought that thanks to Edith, everything was moving forward very quickly. While she was looking through the contents, the Duke approached her and asked what was so funny about it. After that, he immediately asked his next question, asking how she was doing. The girl replied that thanks to him everything was going well, and the man told her that Hugo's teacher said that he was doing well with the program. The blonde laughed and commented that it was very much like him, as the boy was good at everything he did. The young man was sure that Hugo had taken after the main character, and the girl, with a satisfied expression on her face, predicted that the ring would soon appear. The man noted that she seemed certain that the ring would manifest to Hugo. The blonde had seen it in the novel, but to Lucius, her confidence seemed strange. At this point, the man darkened and added that it looked as if she knew everything that would happen in the future. After such a statement, the main character shuddered, expressing the hope that he did not seriously think that she was behaving suspiciously. She turned away from him, thinking that this was precisely why Lucius began to show interest in her. The man seemed to sense what she was thinking and said that it was a joke and that there were no people who could see the future. He changed the subject and asked what the letter on the table was, and the girl replied that it looked like a message from the lady. Surely this letter was a report on her training in controlling her facial expression. But everything turned out differently. In it, the lady poured out her indignation connected with Dawson, and the man who read the letter with her chuckled. Lucius teasingly commented that it seemed like the content wasn't that important, and the blonde wondered why the lady had sent that letter when she was right next to Lucius. At that moment, the young man noticed something and stared intently at the door. The man walked slowly towards the exit, and the blonde asked what happened. The Duke asked her to be quiet, after which he replied that a small boy was walking from side to side in front of the doors. Only a second later did the main character realize that he was talking about her adopted son. Finally, the main character opened the door and asked what Hugo was doing there. After his question, the boy hesitated, and then Lucius assumed that he was looking for Leila. After his question, the main character of the novel nodded his head in embarrassment and silence, as he could not answer clearly. The Duke got the answer he wanted and allowed him to go inside, telling him that his mother was there. As soon as the girl saw her adopted son, she asked what happened. She knew that he was supposed to have lessons now, but for some reason the black-haired child was skipping them. Behind him, the Duke leaned against the wall and confirmed her words that the child was currently studying. The girl stood up from her seat and walked up to Hugo, wondering what could have happened to Hugo during class. She asked him to tell her what happened, because that was the only way she could help him, and the boy admitted that every time the teacher approached him, he was scared. The blonde immediately asked with concern whether the teacher had done something bad to him. With a trembling voice, the child assured her that the teacher had done nothing. But when he looks at the teacher, he constantly remembers his late father. This meant that teacher Hugo was similar to Viscount Marshall, and if so, then now she understood why he was afraid of the teacher. The girl grabbed the child's palms and said with a gentle expression on her face that he must have been very scared. When he confirmed this, girl thought that it would be better to change his teacher anyway. The man watched their interaction closely and said that he should introduce Hugo to a new personal tutor who could be trusted. After his statement, the girl thought that he meant Kizet, but to her surprise, the young man suggested paying attention to a candidate like Rutger. The man explained that Rutger also trained Kizet, and this showed how talented he was, so he could be trusted. And even if not Rutger, one can imagine any other capable knight. The young man turned to his adopted son and suggested that he choose his own teacher. In this way, they will conduct some kind of interview in which the boy will be given a choice. The girl liked this idea and asked what Hugo thought about it, and he nodded his head in agreement. The Duke also smiled and suggested that they go to the training ground right away. At the moment, it was just time for the knights to train. The boy held tightly to his stepmother's hand and watched the knights training with fascination. The girl noticed his interest and asked if he liked what he saw. The main character of the novel smiled and commented that it was very cool. The Duke also touched him and asked who he liked most of those gathered. When the blonde asked which of them looked the coolest, the boy answered without hesitation that his mother was the coolest, and after that he added sheepishly that his mother's ring was also the most beautiful. Only after he said something like this did the boy feel ashamed of his revelation, and he hid behind the Duke. But unlike her initial surprise, the blonde felt happy when she learned her son's opinion. At this point, they were finally noticed, and Rutger and Roxanne began to discuss whether this boy was Leila's son. They wondered why they were here at such an hour, but they did not stop training. The young men came closer, and the Duke began to discuss with the boy that the knights looked even cooler up close. The protagonist asked if Hugo wanted one of them to be his personal teacher, but the main character of the novel remained unsatisfied and replied that he was not sure. Since they were close, Rutger heard them perfectly well and felt that his heart was broken. While they were walking around the training ground, the boy noticed someone. When he stopped, the blonde asked where her adopted son was looking, and following his gaze, she saw a man with gray hair. Hugo's interest turned out to be in the Hizet, and the boy couldn't stop watching his training. The Duke was not at all offended by this, and he asked the boy if he liked the Kazay and received a positive answer. Therefore, the young man suggested that it would be the man with the gray hair who would teach Hugo. In the end, as it was in the novel, Kizet will become Hugo's teacher, and in fact, even if it were not him, there would be no problems. However, if we deviate from the narrative of the novel, the girl believed that she would no longer be needed by Lucius. Deciding not to dwell on this, the girl thanked the Duke for giving Hugo an excellent teacher. A few days later, on the day of the party organized by the lady, the heroine and her future husband finally arrived at the banquet. When the young man helped the girl down, she noticed a scar on his hand. The main character had never heard that Lucius had a scar on his hand, and wondered how she could have not noticed it all this time. The man noticed her staring and explained that he seemed to have gotten injured during training. The blonde took his hand with a thoughtful expression on her face and thought that he really did train with a sword a lot, which is why scars could appear. She decided not to pay attention to it, because the most important thing for her now is to have a great party, Signor. The girl was glad that the opening of the party was going easier than she thought, and that meant that Dawson was not limiting the Signor. Edith must have decorated the hall so beautifully that she didn't even worry about it. At that moment, the man next to the heroine offered to walk arm in arm because he wanted to be at least a little closer to her. Besides, in his opinion, they should show others that they were on good terms. The main character thought that it sounded logical and fulfilled his request. As soon as they entered the hall, everyone in the room immediately began to discuss them. They couldn't believe that the young people were walking arm in arm, making it look like they had something to hide. They also discussed the fact that Duke Rupert was attending parties and recalled that they had seen him at the Hiln family party. The girl was glad that they discussed the appearance of Lucius and assumed that he was on good terms not with Dawson, but with the senior. The lady seemed to sense people's reactions too, so she looked very happy. At this moment, some lady tried to get acquainted with the Duke. The blonde immediately whispered to the man that she would go to the Signor and ask to exchange greetings with other people. The young man made an offended face and admitted that he wanted to go with her. The main character assured Lucius that she would wait for him and he could take his time. After this, the girl quickly left, leaving behind the Duke, who was upset by such a reaction. As Leila approached the girl with red hair, she quickly called out to her to get her attention. The girl greeted her happily and asked if the heroine had seen the expression on everyone's face as they stared at her, because it was the first time she had received so much attention that she could barely keep her face up. The blonde complimented her, saying that she had stood up well and seemed to have trained hard. Every night she practiced imagining Dawson, and it became much easier for her to talk about him than it had been before. The blonde was confident that in the future she would be able to gain the ability to lead the Hiln family. She warned the girl that she would go to meet Edith and quickly found her in the circle of people whom she wanted to win over to the Signor's side. The girl also noticed her and said hello to the blonde. The blonde said it was nice to meet Lady Edith, who looked beautiful today. Edith said that she had just spoken about the heroine because she was soon going to marry Duke Rupert. The blonde confirmed these rumors by saying that there is not much time left before the wedding ceremony, and she wants everyone to come and congratulate them. While Edith was assuring her that of course he would come too, someone approached them from behind. The blonde didn't notice this and thought that now she needed to return to Lucius. When the girl took a step back, she bumped into a man who greeted the Duchess. The man quickly corrected himself, realizing that he certainly couldn't call her that since she wasn't married yet. The girl found his behavior very alarming, and she wanted to know his name, but he had already left. At this moment, the heroine was called out by the main character, who asked what had happened. Leila smiled and assured him that it was nothing like that. She just saw a young guy who was not on the guest list. The man didn't find this funny and asked her to tell him if this happened, because who knows what would have happened if she had followed him alone. The protagonist told her that he planned to warn Rutger and Roxanne about this incident and order them to search the estate's courtyard. The blonde expressed a desire to go too, in order to accurately describe the guy's appearance. She couldn't believe that she was going to a search with Rutger and Roxanne. In the novel, they seemed to end up together, and the girl didn't know if she would disturb them with her presence. Although, judging by everything, they are still far from such a relationship. At this moment, the main character approached the knights and asked if they had accidentally seen a suspicious guy outside. When they were told that Leila had seen some strange person, the young people replied that no one had been seen yet. Roxana asked what he looked like, and the girl said that he was a brunette with brown eyes and looked completely ordinary, and that he also had freckles. There were a lot of people with that appearance, so Rutger asked her if she had accidentally noticed what he was wearing. He approached too suddenly, so the heroine didn't even have time to look at his clothes. The blonde said that maybe there was nothing wrong with it, so they didn't have to waste time searching, but Roxanne replied that they would still search since it wasn't difficult. The Duke ordered them to move more quietly so that they would not be suspected of a search, which the knights promised to do. But in the end, the Knight Commander returned empty-handed because they couldn't find the guy that Mrs. Leila had spoken about. It was very strange because he couldn't just disappear, and you can't just let go of someone who she thinks knows who she really is. At that moment, Dawson Hiln, whom the lady hated so much, came to the party. When the young man noticed the blonde, he looked at her as if he knew she would be here. The protagonist also noticed this and asked if Dawson Hill was really staring at his fiancée. And at the same time, he also disrespectfully looked away, as if he saw something not worth his attention. The girl asked him to calm down and said that she would quickly talk to Dawson about the mine and return. The young man hung his head, although he himself understood perfectly well that the mine had to be returned. Leila couldn't understand why he was reacting like that, because he had married her because of this diamond mine. She touched his chest, asking him not to stare at her while they talked near him. The man watched the girl leave with a sad expression on his face and wondered out loud what he was doing all this time. When the main character approached Dawson, his interlocutor was the first to notice Leila. The young man greeted the Duchess of Euport and said that he really wanted to meet her and was finally able to do so here. The main character smiled and replied that she was very pleased to hear that. At that moment, Dawson also greeted her and said that he had only heard rumors, but that she was really as beautiful as they said. The girl thought that she really was used to hiding her feelings much better than the gentleman, but she still responded to the greeting. The main character decided to end the formalities and asked the young man to talk to her for a bit. Hilna's companion immediately realized that he was superfluous here and said that he would then leave for a short while. When he left, the red-haired man said that in any case he wanted to find the blonde, and it seemed that she was also looking for him. The young man didn't think that the main character had any business with him, and this surprised him. The red-haired man suggested going to a quiet place and discussing everything properly without prying eyes. The girl looked where his gaze was directed and realized that it seemed that people did not come here, and since he brought her to such a place, he definitely wanted to lure her to his side. But to his regret, she didn't fall for it so easily and told him that she thought they weren't on such a good relationship yet and that he was rushing things a bit. She laughed insincerely and commented that she thought he was a cautious person, but it seems she was wrong. The man immediately darkened and asked directly why she was actually looking for him, since he thought that she wanted to weigh on whose side it was better, him or his sister. The girl was still smiling and said that he didn't know how to read people at all. The main character explained that she had no intention of going back on her words and just wanted to know if he was going to quit the game. But judging by his recent actions, he had no intention of doing so. The man pulled himself together again and said that not everything was going so smoothly and his sister would not be able to achieve the goal of this party. The girl realized that knowing what the purpose of this party was, he was going to ruin everything. If the party is ruined, then the lady's image will be completely tarnished, something that Dawson understood perfectly well, who said that today he would find out how bad a choice the blonde made. The man announced that there were many who wanted to meet him, and he needed to go one last time, saying that if she continued like this, she would regret it. The girl watched him go and wondered what Dawson Hillen was planning. The main character entered the banquet hall again and approached her two business partners. She warned the senior that it looked like her brother was going to ruin this party. When the redhead heard that the blonde had just spoken to Dawson Hill, her mood also worsened. The blonde realized that Lucius had gone somewhere while she was gone, and the guy who had spoken to her recently was somewhere here. She thought that she needed to tell Rutger and Roxana about this quickly, but everyone had disappeared somewhere. At that moment, the girl heard a rustle and noticed in the distance the same guy she had met at the banquet. It would have been safer to tell someone first, but now there was no time for that. There was nothing left to do but try to thwart Dawson's plan myself. It seemed like it was a real labyrinth, and the girl had no idea that there were such things in the Hiln Garden. When the girl tried to catch up with the young man, she realized that she was lost in this tangled labyrinth. The blonde suggested that it would be better to stop here and wait for someone to come, but she remembered that no one knew that she was here. When she started to panic again, the girl calmed herself down by thinking that if she was lost, then that guy could also get lost in the maze. So with a determined expression on her face, she began searching for him before they got too far apart. While Leila was listening intently, she heard a strange rustling sound somewhere, and heading in that direction, she saw a brunette coming out of the bushes. For a second, they just stared at each other until the girl came to her senses and grabbed the man, demanding answers. She needed to know who he was and how he found out about her, but the man brushed her off. When he asked her why it mattered at all how he knew this, the girl grabbed his hand again and said that she knew that he wanted her to follow him here. The girl again demanded to know who told the young man about her and how he hid from the surveillance of the Knights of Jupert. The man ordered her to shut up, saying that he had to go somewhere so she should leave nicely. At that moment, the blonde pulled out a gun and gave advice not to judge people by their appearance. She pointed the gun at him and said she didn't want to hurt him, so he just had to start talking. The young man asked if it was a real gun, and the girl mysteriously replied that only she knew. The man became scared, and deciding not to risk his life, he asked what she wanted to know. The blonde asked why he approached her and spoke as if he knew who she was and who ordered him to do it. Adding what this man's ultimate goal was, which made the brunette turn pale, the man decided not to reveal his plans as it was against orders. But he said that the blonde's life was not in danger. When the girl looked at him closely, she realized that he was being threatened and asked if it was Dawson Zion. After the man heard this name, he flinched and hid his expression from her, and the girl understood everything. If this young guy is so desperate to follow orders, then Dawson took something dear from him, and maybe he is even threatening his family. The blonde asked if he was afraid of losing what the red-haired man had taken, and the man asked in surprise how she knew. The heroine replied that Dawson Hiln told her that he was going to ruin today's party, and the guy probably also received some kind of task that would help with his plan. But Leila must ensure the successful completion of this event, so she gave the man a choice. She offered him to work with her, and then she would help him get back what Hiln had taken. And just as the man was about to ask how she would do it, the girl's necklace began to glow. This made the young man hesitate, and eventually he pushed the heroine away from him. The blonde tried to stop him, saying that if he was going to Dawson's, there was no point in it, but he didn't listen to her. She finally found a way out of the labyrinth and realized that the man was probably already far away. At that moment, the main character was called out by her future husband, who also suddenly left somewhere. The man ran up to her and excitedly admitted that he was very worried. The main character explained that he went to look for the guy that the blonde was talking about with Rutger and Roxanne, but it seems he ran away. The girl stopped his story because she herself had something to say about it. But when she put her hand in front of her, the man saw the wound on her hand and immediately asked about it. The main character assured him that nothing terrible had happened and it was just a scratch. The man did not listen to her and ordered Rutger to find ointment and bandage to bandage the wound. The blonde continued to say that such a scratch would go away the next morning, and now there were more important things to do. The young man shook his head and replied that nothing was more important than that she was hurt. So I suggested talking about it after they treated the wound, which they did. After everything was ready, The man asked her not to go to dangerous places alone anymore. When the blonde replied that it was just a Hiln garden, Roxanne commented that in the current situation, even this garden was dangerous, and traces of shadows were found in the Hiln mansion. Leila asked for details, and the girl with red hair explained that they were worried whether the guy she was talking about was a shadow, because otherwise he would not have been able to hide from the surveillance of the knights from the Duchy of Juper. The girl agreed with this statement, because Dawson probably uses shadows to turn the party into chaos without suspicion. But Dawson must have known that Lucius would be at the party, and was still sure that the party would fail. I understood that he was going to do something that Lucius would not be able to fix. Besides, speaking about the method of pursuit, they did not have time to sit still and what she told the Duke. The main character stood up from her seat and informed the Duke that they should quickly return to the main hall. As they were heading to the main hall, the young man asked to tell them what was about to happen. The blonde hesitated for a second and then said that it was complicated, but she would try to explain in a few words. The guy Leila was talking about is being threatened by Dawson with something, so the brunette is going to ruin the party. So the main character thought that it would happen in the banquet hall. At that moment, the young people felt something, and because of this, they had some kind of bad feeling. The main character quietly cursed, saying that they were already too late and would not be able to prevent anything. The Viscountess wanted to ask what he meant, but at that moment, she felt a strong jolt that swept through the entire mansion. The girl could only look in horror in the direction of the main hall, from the doors of which a puff of smoke burst out after the explosion.